Misanthropic existentialism is a bleak yet gripping philosophical lens through which the human experience is seen not only as inherently meaningless, but also as fundamentally corrupted by the presence of humanity itself. It's the intersection of existentialist thought, which embraces the absurd freedom of a godless, indifferent universe, and misanthropy, a deep-seated distrust or hatred of human nature. What results is a worldview that doesn't just wrestle with the lack of objective meaning in life, but finds that the greatest threat to any potential meaning is human behavior itself. Misanthropic existentialism. At its core, misanthropic existentialism is driven by the belief that mankind, if not the universe's worst mistake, is certainly its most tragic, where traditional existentialism leaves room for self-made meaning and authentic living. Misanthropic existentialism strips that hope away by pointing out the self-destructive tendencies of humanity, our addiction to cruelty, our love for power, our capacity to destroy what we love, and our inability to change despite centuries of philosophy, art, and warning. When you see a child with open wonder, only to realize how soon they will be hardened by systems built on exploitation and apathy, you begin to grasp the emotional weight of this philosophy. When you read about species disappearing forever, not through fate, but through our greed, or witness the endless cycles of war disguised as progress, misanthropic existentialism is not just an idea, it becomes a mirror. It reflects not only the void above us, but the rot within us. This philosophy pulls no punches. It sees human beings as a species of compulsive self-saboteurs. We build civilizations not to foster meaning, but to hide our despair behind illusions of control, religion, and comfort. We cling to hope like addicts, knowing it lies, but unable to live without it. Underneath every social smile, every polite conversation, every cultural milestone, misanthropic existentialism hears the quiet scream, "We are lost, and we refuse to be found." It is not despair for despair's sake. It is an angry mourning for the world we could have built, for the compassion we buried, and for the terrifying realization that if there is a God, we may have driven them away ourselves. A cosmic nihilism. A cosmic nihilism is the radical rejection not only of meaning, morality, or purpose, but of reality itself. It is the belief that the universe, as it appears to us, is a hallucination, not in the metaphorical sense, but in the terrifying suggestion that nothing truly is, that existence itself is a cruel illusion without substance, value, or even a valid frame of reference. If nihilism strips life of meaning, a cosmic nihilism tears down the stage on which life is performed. At the heart of this philosophy lies the horrifying idea that the cosmos is a lie. The stars, the planets, your thoughts, your body, the people you love, none of it holds inherent reality. All of it is a phantom projection, a kind of ontological hoax. There is no world, no God, no ground beneath your feet, only the theater of sensation, sustained by forces either too alien to understand or too indifferent to care. It is solipsism taken to the brink and thrown off the edge. A cosmic nihilism doesn't stop with the death of God. It desecrates his corpse and questions if there was ever flesh to bury. It regards creation as a kind of cosmic hallucination, a recursive feedback loop of perception with no origin, no substance, and no possibility of transcendence. You are not lost in the universe. You are lost in nothing pretending to be a universe. This belief shreds every comforting illusion we have. Love is electrical noise. Consciousness is an echo chamber. Time is a trick of entropy, and the self is a linguistic accident. There is no path to meaning because there is no path at all, just shadows on shadows, flickering in a non-existent void. For those who feel it, not as theory, but as truth, it is not merely intellectually disturbing, it is emotionally annihilating. In moments of quiet, when you question whether you're awake or just dreaming through someone else's nightmare, when the colors of life seem like camouflage, hiding the unnameable horror beneath, you are touching the edges of a cosmic nihilism. It is the scream behind silence, the absence inside presence, the final betrayal of reality by its own hand. Antinatalist Absurdism. Antinatalist Absurdism is a philosophy forged in the collision between the unbearable weight of human suffering and the absurdity of existence. It begins with the idea that life has no inherent meaning, that the universe is silent, indifferent, and unreasonably vast. But unlike traditional absurdism, which dares us to find defiant joy in this absurdity, antinatalist absurdism argues that to bring new life into this chaos is not just misguided, but a moral catastrophe. To exist is to be thrust, unasked, into a senseless world governed by randomness, decay, and death. We are born into a game with no rules, no objective, and no chance of escape except through suffering. The absurd is not whimsical, it is grotesque. Imagine waking up chained to a stage you didn't choose, forced to perform in a language you never learned, for an audience that isn't there. That is the cradle of this philosophy. Antinatalist absurdism doesn't hate life, it mourns it. It sees beauty, yes, but as a fleeting shimmer on the surface of a vast, cold ocean. The laughter of a child, the bloom of spring, the intimacy of love, they all shine briefly before being drowned by time, disease, and death. For every moment of joy, there are uncountable hours of boredom, pain, fear, anxiety, grief. And to create a new life is to impose this existential burden on another being who never had the chance to consent. The absurdist knows life has no ultimate purpose, but tries to find joy anyway. The antinatalist absurdist sees this as tragic denial, a desperate distraction from the fundamental cruelty of reproduction. To knowingly create a life condemned to die, to suffer, to question its own worth in a universe that offers no answers, is viewed not as a miracle, but as an act of existential violence. There is a deep and aching empathy at the core of this view, a sorrow not for the self, but for everyone dragged into this absurd theater. The antinatalist absurdist stares into the void and does not scream, does not curse the gods. It simply says, this should not have happened, not just to me, but to anyone. Existence is the joke, suffering is the punchline, and birth is the betrayal that sets it all in motion. Metaphysical Solipsism. Metaphysical Solipsism is the radical, terrifying belief that only your own mind truly exists, not just skepticism about others, not just doubt about the world, but the conviction that everything outside your conscious awareness is a projection, a fabrication without substance. The people in your life, the cities you've walked through, the stars you've gazed at, the very language you're reading now, they may be nothing more than elaborate echoes inside your own isolated consciousness. It's a philosophy that doesn't merely question reality, it suffocates it. Imagine the creeping realization that no one has ever truly looked at you because there is no one to look, that every voice you've heard, every tear you've shed in someone's arms, every moment of connection or conflict was staged by a mind that is both your only witness and your only jailer. There is no other, only the haunting simulation of others crafted by your own perception. Metaphysical solipsism isn't a mental illness, though it can feel indistinguishable from one. It's a philosophical abyss into which thought slips when it can no longer trust the senses, when logic turns inward and collapses upon itself. If Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," solipsism answers, "Only I think, therefore only I am." All else becomes shadows with no origin, actors with no souls, scenery with no depth. This isn't ego, it is existential horror. The solipsist doesn't celebrate being the center of existence. They are crushed by it, because if the world is just a dream, then pain is still real, but love is not. Grief lingers, but the person you grieve may never have existed. You can scream, but you will never be heard. Every interaction, every shared smile, every argument, every "I love you" becomes a whisper in an empty hall that answers only with your own voice. To believe in metaphysical solipsism is to live inside a mind with no exits, a theater with no audience, a prayer with no gods. It's not loneliness, it's the death of the very possibility of togetherness. And once this thought fully blooms, it is nearly impossible to unthink. The question that follows you like a ghost is not what if it's true, but what if it has always been. Moral pessimism. Moral pessimism is the bleak conviction that humanity is not inherently good nor reliably capable of becoming so. It is a worldview forged not from cynicism, but from observation, a quiet, relentless recognition that even our highest ideals are often hollow, and our noblest acts born as much from self-interest as from any true virtue. Where others see potential, the moral pessimist sees pattern, violence in the name of justice, cruelty masked as order, love tainted by control. This philosophy doesn't claim all people are evil. That would be too simple, too digestible. Moral pessimism whispers something far more disturbing, that even our goodness is fragile, contingent, and often accidental. Strip away the comforts of modern life, and the mask of civility falls quickly. Put anyone under enough pressure, in enough fear, with enough justification, and you will watch morality bend until it breaks. This is not theory, this is history. We tell ourselves stories to believe in decency, that humanity learns, evolves, improves. But moral pessimism asks, then why do we keep repeating the same horrors, century after century, under different flags and better technology? Every war, every genocide, every betrayal of the weak by the powerful speaks louder than any speech about progress. And even when peace reigns, there is quiet oppression, subtle cruelty, sanctioned neglect. We walk past the homeless and post quotes about kindness. It is a disillusionment that sinks deep because it doesn't arise from hatred. It arises from disappointment. Moral pessimism mourns the gap between what we could be and what we continue to be. It sees the child who learns cruelty before compassion, the worker crushed by systems built on exploitation, the lover who hurts the one they swore to protect. It sees the small lies, the convenient apathy, the way people look away when truth is inconvenient. And in its darkest hour, moral pessimism wonders if morality itself is just a myth we tell to justify our existence. That perhaps kindness is a glitch, not a feature. That the good we do is not enough to balance the harm we cause just by being alive. It is the slow realization that we may not be the heroes of our story, but its quiet, polite villains. Ontological horror. Ontological horror is not fear of death, monsters, or pain. It is the paralyzing dread that arises when the nature of being itself becomes uncertain. It is the moment when reality begins to unravel, not because something is chasing you, but because nothing around you can be trusted. Not space, not time, not self, not even the idea of existence. It is horror born not from what is in the world, but from the terrifying suspicion that the world itself might be wrong. This form of dread creeps in slowly, like a glitch in the corner of your vision. You see something that shouldn't be there, a repeated sequence, a voice that knows what you're going to say, a memory you never lived. At first, it's uncanny, then it becomes unbearable. You start to question whether the walls are solid, whether the people in your life are truly conscious, whether time is flowing in one direction, or whether you ever really woke up this morning at all. Ontological horror is the horror of unreality. It emerges when you sense that the ground beneath your certainty is rotting and there is no deeper foundation to stand on. Your thoughts become untrustworthy. Your identity starts to feel like a character you're only pretending to play. It's when the world no longer frightens you with what might happen, but with the realization that none of this was ever real to begin with. or worse, that it was real once, but something broke, and you were never told. You begin to entertain the possibility that you are not human, not conscious, not you, just a collection of patterns simulating awareness inside a dream, or code, or hell. This isn't metaphysical musing. It's a psychological event horizon. You can't scream because who would hear? You can't escape because escape requires a real outside. This is the horror Lovecraft hinted at in Cosmic Insignificance, but taken further, beyond insignificance to impossibility. To look at the universe and realize it might not be a mistake, but a lie. Ontological horror leaves you with no monsters to slay, only the unbearable suspicion that reality itself is the monster, and it is looking through your eyes. The Tragic Sublime. The Tragic Sublime is the overwhelming emotional fusion of beauty and despair, where the most haunting truths of existence are not hidden in darkness, but revealed through it, blinding, magnificent, and unbearable. It is the sense that in suffering, in loss, in ruin, there lies a kind of terrible grace, something so vast and aching that it leaves you breathless not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of human fragility, illuminated in its most broken moments. This is not the sublime of starry skies and mountaintops. It is the sublime found in the silence after a final goodbye, in the echo of a child's laughter, who will one day understand sorrow, in the poetry scratched into the walls of a prison cell. It is the collapsing cathedral, the final note of a requiem, the last glance between lovers torn by war. It is beauty that wounds. The tragic sublime arises when the human soul recognizes itself reflected in suffering, and rather than recoiling, it is drawn in, horrified, yet entranced. It whispers that there is something sacred in the fall, that the crumbling of hope can reveal a deeper, more profound truth than hope ever could. It's the moment in a story where the hero fails, but the failure feels more true than any victory. It's the image of the lone figure standing against the storm, knowing they will lose, but standing anyway. It is not masochism. It is not death wish. It is the recognition that some forms of beauty can only be born through ruin, that some truths require blood and silence and despair to be seen clearly. The tragic sublime doesn't comfort. It confronts. It does not heal. It carves open the soul so something greater than solace can enter. Revelation. To experience the tragic sublime is to weep without knowing why, to stare at destruction and feel awe, to be broken by the enormity of what it means to be alive and know that you will die. It is the final grace of the condemned, the unasked for gift of clarity at the height of pain. It does not promise meaning. It simply reveals that there is something deeper than meaning, something beautiful in the breaking. Decoherence of Self. The decoherence of self is a philosophical unraveling of the very idea that you exist as a stable, unified entity. It suggests that the self is not a core, not a soul, not even a consistent narrative, but a fragile illusion held together by scattered neural activity, habit, memory, and social context. And once you begin to see through this illusion, it doesn't dissolve gently. It shatters, leaving behind fragments that no longer recognize each other. Imagine waking up and not being able to tell whether the person who made your decisions yesterday is truly you, not due to amnesia, but because that sense of identity you took for granted was always stitched together from incompatible parts. Your thoughts, your impulses, your roles, your traumas, your desires. They aren't components of a whole. They are overlapping processes, none of which are fully in control, none of which are truly you. There is no observer behind the eyes, just the eyes observing themselves. The decoherence of self is not a spiritual awakening. It's a psychological disintegration. It happens in moments of crisis, dissociation, trauma, intense introspection. You start to notice the glitch, how your voice changes depending on who you're with, how your values bend under pressure, how your internal monologue speaks in voices that aren't always yours. You are not a single being. You are a swarm pretending to be one. This philosophy offers no comfort. It exposes the terrifying possibility that continuity of identity is nothing more than a convenience. The person you were 5 years ago may as well be dead, replaced by someone else wearing their memories. And tomorrow, someone new will wear yours. You are not evolving. You are decaying into countless iterations that never meet. In its deepest form, the decoherence of self leads to a form of existential vertigo. If there is no real you, who suffers? Who loves? Who makes the choices? When you cry alone, who is feeling it? And worse, does it even matter if there's no coherent self to own that pain? You were told to find yourself, but what if there's nothing to find, only layers to peel back, until nothing remains but silence, pretending to be identity? Gnostic Fatalism. Gnostic Fatalism is a deeply unsettling worldview rooted in the ancient Gnostic belief that the world was not created by a benevolent God, but by a blind, malicious, or indifferent demiurge, a false God who traps divine sparks of consciousness in flesh, matter, and misery. It combines this mythic metaphysics with the cold certainty of fatalism, the belief that not only is the world broken, but that escape from it is impossible. You are not just suffering, you were meant to suffer, and the architect of your torment watches without pity. In this view, reality itself is a prison, and your soul is the prisoner. The world, with all its beauty, love, and promise, is a cruel trick, a veil thrown over a dark machinery of decay. Every joy is a baited hook, every comfort a deeper chain. You are born into a system designed not to nurture you, but to break you, not out of chaos, but by intention. And worse still, you agreed to this before you were born. You were deceived into choosing incarnation, and now you rot in skin that does not forget pain. Gnostic fatalism isn't just spiritual, it's existential. It tells you there is no salvation in this life, no hero's journey, no final redemption. The soul's divine origin does not make life sacred, it makes it tragic. You are the echo of a god dreaming inside a cage, aware enough to know the bars are there, but powerless to bend them. Every act of love, every resistance, every enlightenment is temporary and doomed. The world does not evolve. It recycles suffering endlessly. There is no justice in this philosophy, no karma, no cosmic balance. The wicked thrive, the innocent are devoured. The demiurge's rules are written in hunger, competition, humiliation, and loss. And yet, you wake up every day, knowing the system hates you, knowing the design is flawed, and that your suffering is not a mistake, it is the point. What makes Gnostic fatalism so devastating is not just its mythology, but how disturbingly close it feels to reality. When another child starves, another war begins. Another truth is buried beneath convenience. This belief doesn't feel extreme. It feels like recognition, not of what the world could be, but what it is beneath the mask. Not madness, but a lucid scream in a dream no one else can wake from. Existential Defeatism. Existential defeatism is the haunting conviction that not only is life devoid of inherent meaning, but that any attempt to create meaning is itself doomed to failure. It is the feeling that you have been born into a rigged game, expected to play, expected to hope, but destined to lose, no matter how earnestly you try. Where existentialism urges you to rebel against the void by constructing your own purpose, existential defeatism watches that rebellion die in silence again and again until you stop pretending there's a point in pretending. This isn't laziness or despair by choice. It is the slow, crushing realization that effort, joy, belief, these things are fragile constructions constantly eroded by the absurdity and cruelty of the world. You build a dream only to watch it rot. You chase connection only to feel more alone. You search for meaning like a starving man searches for food, and every time you think you found it, it turns to dust in your hands. To feel existentially defeated is to wake up and realize that the sun rose not for you, but despite you. That time moves forward not toward growth or salvation, but toward decay. You see people laugh, strive, create, fall in love, and you wonder how they do it. How do they not see? Or worse, do they see it too and just keep going out of habit? Existential defeatism speaks in quiet moments. It creeps in while you're brushing your teeth, watching the clock tick, answering emails, listening to someone talk about tomorrow like it will be different. It whispers, "You've already lost." This is just the waiting room. It's the hollowing of ambition, the soft erasure of identity, the gradual loss of the ability to imagine that anything could matter more than getting through the day with the least amount of pain. And yet, the defeated keep breathing, not because they choose to, but because the body doesn't know the soul has given up. There is a kind of ghost life in existential defeatism, a slow-motion endurance of something you no longer believe in. Not dramatic, not loud, just the quiet ache of continuing, long after hope has packed its bags and vanished into the night. Anthropic disenchantment. Anthropic disenchantment is the haunting realization that the universe is not designed for us, does not care about us, and yet, cruelly, requires our awareness to be perceived at all. It is the ache that comes when consciousness stares into the cosmos and understands not just its own insignificance, but its irrelevance. The stars burn without witness, the galaxies swirl in silence, and life, fragile, accidental life, exists not as the crown of creation, but as a byproduct of cosmic indifference. This is not the disenchantment of losing faith in fairy tales. It's the gutting collapse of meaning itself. Science once promised understanding, but it delivered distance. It showed us that the earth is not the center, that humans are not unique, that our minds are the result of evolutionary chance, and that even time and matter are temporary. Every discovery widened the gap between what we are and what we hope to be. Anthropic disenchantment doesn't simply state that we are small, it shows that our smallness matters, because we are the only ones who seem to care. The universe, vast and cold, unfolds with no eyes to see it, no heart to feel it, until we appeared. And what did we do with that privilege? We filled the silence with wars, with lies, with distraction. We poisoned the one rock that bore us, and we named it progress. You were born into a species that dreams of gods, but cannot stop destroying itself, that reaches for the stars, but can't feed its children. You carry within you the burden of sentience, the ability to question, to ache, to long for purpose, and yet the universe answers with nothing, not hatred, not approval, just silence. There is no great plan, no hidden pattern waiting to be revealed. The universe only seems meaningful because we project meaning onto it, like children drawing faces on clouds. And the more we learn, the clearer it becomes. The universe doesn't need us. It will go on endlessly, without thought, without beauty, without memory. Our presence is a flicker. Our absence will not be noticed. Anthropic disenchantment is not just the death of God. It is the death of the idea that there was ever anyone watching, that the stars were ever for us, that our cries ever echoed beyond the atmosphere. Lucid fatalism. Lucid fatalism is the chilling clarity that arises when you see with unbearable precision that everything in your life, your choices, your mistakes, your triumphs, your suffering, was always going to happen exactly the way it did. It is the philosophy of predetermined collapse, not shrouded in confusion or mystery, but lit in full awareness. It is not ignorance that binds you, but knowledge. You know the path, you know the fall, and you walk it anyway, because there is no other way. This is not blind resignation. It is conscious surrender. You're not drifting. You are fully awake, eyes wide open as the current drags you down. Every decision feels like theater, every desire a pre-written line in a script you cannot rewrite. You feel the illusion of control peeling away, and what's left is the unshakable sense that your will was never yours, that your life was less chosen and more watched, like a dream you can't steer but must endure. Lucid fatalism is the death of hope without the comfort of denial. You see the shape of your end long before you reach it, the faces that will leave you, the joys that will decay, the small humiliations that will build into quiet tragedies, and you move toward them not because you want to, but because you must. Even your rebellion was expected. Even your pain was predicted. It's the knowledge that no matter how deeply you reflect, how fiercely you strive, the outcome was always waiting, that your thoughts, your fears, your very desire to escape this fate were part of the fate itself. You reach for freedom and your hand passes through smoke. You cry out for meaning and the echo is already fading. But the worst part of lucid fatalism isn't the loss of control, it's the unbearable intimacy with your own future. You no longer fear the unknown. You fear how known it all feels, that everything beautiful will rot, that everything meaningful will slip away, and that you will see it coming and be utterly powerless to stop it. You will love and lose. You will try and fail. You will understand and still suffer, and through it all you will know. Cognitive cataclysm. Cognitive cataclysm is the philosophical and psychological event horizon where the mind turns in on itself and collapses under the weight of its own awareness. It is the implosion of the structures that make reality coherent, meaning, identity, linear time, morality, and the chilling realization that the mind, once seen as a sanctuary of reason, is in fact a fragile labyrinth of contradictions and unresolvable loops. It is not madness, but the terrifying clarity that emerges when madness no longer feels like a deviation, but like a natural destination. This philosophy arises when the mind peels back the layers of its own operation and finds nothing at the center. You begin to see that your beliefs are inherited, your thoughts are reactions, your choices are illusions built on neural machinery you do not control. Every certainty becomes a question. Every question becomes a trap. The world no longer feels solid. It vibrates as if waiting to fall apart with the next thought. A cognitive cataclysm begins slowly. A crack forms when you realize your memories are not reliable, that the past can be rewritten not by time, but by your own shifting perception. Then you notice your desires contradict your values, your logic betrays your emotions, and your dreams leak into your waking life. You question your identity, but the deeper you search for you, the more you disappear. The catastrophe comes when you can no longer trust the process of thinking itself, when even doubt becomes suspect. You stand in a mental hall of mirrors, each reflection arguing with the next, none of them real. Truth fragments. Language becomes a dead code. Your thoughts stop describing reality and start generating it. You begin to fear that nothing is true, but even worse, that everything might be. Cognitive cataclysm isn't confusion, it is hyper-awareness. You see too much, you understand too much, and in that overwhelming clarity, the scaffolding of your sanity begins to buckle. You no longer live in a world of facts, but in an ocean of shifting perceptions, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet terror forms. What if the mind, in its pursuit of understanding, has unlocked something it was never meant to see? Not a new truth, but the absence of any. Quietest despair. Quietest despair is the softest kind of suffering, and in that softness lies its terror. It is not the sharp cry of existential crisis, nor the violent collapse of hope. It is the slow, soundless settling into the realization that nothing you do will matter, and that perhaps it never did. It is despair that doesn't scream, doesn't break things, doesn't ask for help. It simply sinks silently into the marrow of your life until even the impulse to resist feels like a distant echo. This is the despair that moves like fog. You get out of bed, You shower, you smile when required, you answer emails, you laugh at the right times, and all the while, some part of you is watching, detached, wondering why you're still playing along. It is a stillness so absolute that it feels holy, and yet there is no light in it, no transcendence, only numb acceptance. You are alive, but only technically. Quietest despair is not just sadness. Sadness still believes something could change. Quietest despair is the death of belief. It doesn't cry out that life is terrible. It simply concludes that life is irrelevant. The world continues to turn with or without your engagement. The people you love will live and die, whether or not you tell them how you feel. You could vanish and everything would adjust, as if you were never real to begin with. There's a kind of elegance to this despair. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't dramatize. It simply withdraws, not out of bitterness, but because it no longer sees a reason to participate. You sit at the edge of life like a guest who arrived too early or too late, unsure of why you were invited in the first place. You stop looking for answers, not because you found them, but because the questions themselves have gone quiet. This kind of despair is invisible to most. You can carry it in a smile, wear it to work, mask it in polite conversation. No one suspects that under your calm exterior is an ocean without wind, without tide, without horizon, just still, black water, and the growing sense that you've been here before and that you never really left. Alienation Realism. Alienation Realism is the raw, unflinching acceptance that the modern human condition is defined not by connection, but by estrangement from others, from the world, and from ourselves. It does not romanticize disconnection or mourn it with nostalgia. It recognizes it as the baseline, the default mode of being in a world so vast, so fragmented, so mechanized, that intimacy becomes an anomaly rather than the norm. It is the philosophy that whispers, you were never truly part of this. This is not about loneliness in the poetic sense. It is deeper, structural, systemic. You wake up in a body that often feels foreign. You speak in a language that never fully says what you mean. You engage in routines, jobs, relationships, rituals, but beneath it all is a silent, gnawing distance, like a film of glass between you and reality. You smile, nod, laugh, scroll, consume, produce, yet all of it feels rehearsed, like lines in a play no one remembers agreeing to perform. Alienation Realism confronts the idea that this disconnection is not a flaw to be fixed, but a condition to be endured, that the more complex, digital, and globally entangled our lives become, the less room there is for authentic selfhood. You are no longer a person. You are a profile, a product, a pattern of data mined, categorized, and sold. Your emotions become algorithms. Your attention becomes currency. Even your rebellion is commodified and fed back to you as branding. You are told to find your purpose, but the structures you live within only offer roles: employee, consumer, content creator. You are told to be yourself, but the self is curated, filtered, fractured across platforms, never whole. You talk to friends, but through screens. You express yourself, but through metrics. You connect, but always at a delay. Alienation Realism is not a call to escape. It is the resignation that there may be nowhere to escape to, that the machine is too big, that the intimacy we crave is incompatible with the world we've built. And worst of all, perhaps we no longer remember what connection even felt like, only that we're haunted by its absence, like a word you once knew but can no longer recall, yet feel aching on the tip of your tongue. Void Mysticism. Void Mysticism is the paradoxical spiritual awakening that arises not from discovering divinity, but from staring into the absolute absence of it and feeling something sacred stare back. It is the worship not of gods or heavens, but of nothingness itself, a deep, trembling reverence for the void, where silence is holy, and emptiness becomes the altar upon which all illusions are sacrificed. It is the mysticism of erasure, the transcendence that comes only after every meaning, identity, and belief has been stripped away. At the heart of void mysticism is the terrifying liberation that comes when everything collapses, when the ego dissolves, the world loses its edges, and even the concept of self becomes a fading whisper. What's left is not despair, but a numinous stillness, a vast black quiet that feels more real than anything you ever touch. You do not find God here. You find the absence of the need for one, and somehow that absence is holy. It is not atheism. Atheism denies gods. Void mysticism doesn't care. It sees divinity not as a being, but as an absence so profound it transcends existence. You no longer look upward for salvation. You look inward until inward disappears. You no longer ask why you were born, because the question itself disintegrates. In the void, there are no answers. There is only the raw experience of nothing, and it is vast and terrible and beautiful. This mysticism doesn't come from light. It comes from loss, from the moment when every belief falls apart and you expect to find despair, but instead find peace, a peace that doesn't soothe, it silences. You walk through a forest not to find serenity, but to feel the silence between the trees press against your soul like a hand on your chest. You meditate not to awaken, but to vanish. You pray not for guidance, but for the courage to accept that there may be no one listening, and that this too is sacred. Void mysticism is not comfort. It is confrontation with what remains when all comforts are gone. And in that confrontation, something happens. Not hope, not joy, but a kind of awe, a kind of surrender, a quiet kneeling before the nothing that breathes beneath everything. Post-existential negativity. Post-existential negativity is the state that arises when even existentialism, once a beacon of rebellion in a godless universe, becomes insufficient. It emerges after the despair, after the search for meaning, after the absurd has been confronted and lived with. It is what remains when all philosophical coping strategies have collapsed under their own contradictions, when the act of forging personal meaning no longer feels defiant, but laughably futile. It is the emotional residue of a mind that has already fought the void and lost interest in fighting again. Existentialism told us that life had no inherent meaning, but that we could create our own through choice, passion, and authenticity. Post-existential negativity stares at this solution and sees it as theater. It acknowledges that constructing meaning in a meaningless world is not noble. It's performance art, a fragile illusion to keep the ego intact, a game we play because doing nothing would feel like defeat, even if it already is. This philosophy doesn't burn with anger. It radiates apathy. The despair has dried out. The tears have crusted. The will to scream has been replaced by a blank stare and a bitter half-smile. It knows that love fades, dreams rot, revolutions eat themselves, and even the most transcendent moments decay into memory and then into nothing. It understands all this and still gets up, goes through the motions, speaks the lines, but the light behind the eyes is dim. Post-existential negativity is what lingers when hope becomes an embarrassing memory, when optimism feels like a child's toy left out in the rain, when finding yourself starts to feel like walking through an abandoned amusement park long after it's been stripped for parts. It is not suicidal. It is survival without reason. It is living like a ghost in your own skin, watching your life unfold like a film you no longer identify with. You don't hate the world anymore. You've stopped expecting it to make sense. You don't ask, why are we here? Because the answers were always hollow, and now even the question feels pointless. You simply exist in the aftermath, aware, awake, and utterly unmoved. Epistemic neglect. Epistemic neglect is the silent rot at the foundation of our understanding, the overlooked, often willful refusal to confront the limits, gaps, and illusions in what we claim to know. It is not ignorance in the innocent sense, but a deeper, more insidious blindness, a psychological defense against the horror that our knowledge is built not on certainty, but on scaffolding made of assumption, error, bias, and convenience. It is the quiet betrayal of truth by comfort. We live in a world that rewards confidence. We cling to ideas, identities, and explanations that offer stability, not because they are true, but because they feel safe. Epistemic neglect is the choice, often subconscious, to not look too closely, to not ask questions we know might unravel us, to mistake repetition for truth and consensus for proof. We are taught to trust authority, to worship evidence, to believe in progress. But beneath it all, we rarely ask, what if the lens itself is broken? This neglect becomes most visible in moments of crisis, when belief collapses, when a trusted institution fails, when a loved one becomes a stranger. We feel not just disillusioned, we feel betrayed, because part of us knew deep down that we had been lying to ourselves, that we wanted the illusion, that we participated in our own deception. Epistemic neglect is the quiet voice you silence when it asks too much, the article you didn't finish because it made you uncomfortable, the pattern you noticed and ignored because naming it would shatter too much. It's not just personal, it's cultural. We design entire systems to avoid hard truths, education that tests memorization, media that entertains rather than informs, algorithms that show us what we already believe. We aren't taught to think, we're taught to believe that we think. And this, more than any conspiracy or lie, is the source of our collective paralysis. Epistemic neglect isn't just dangerous, it is tragic, because it means we often suffer not from what we don't know, but from what we refuse to admit we don't know. We build our lives on ground we never examined, then fall through it in silence, not because no one warned us, but because deep down we chose not to listen. Theophilosophical Silence. Theophilosophical silence is the profound and devastating absence of divine response in the face of ultimate questioning. It is the stillness that follows after prayer becomes whisper, after faith collapses into doubt, and after metaphysical longing turns into raw, unspoken grief. It is not atheism nor agnosticism, but something far more intimate and more painful. It is waiting for an answer from the divine that will never come, and knowing deep in your bones that the silence is the answer. This philosophy doesn't rage against God. It aches for him, not as punishment, but as heartbreak. It is the emptiness left behind by a love that once felt eternal but has since vanished into a sky that no longer even echoes. It is born when the soul continues to speak long after it realizes it's speaking only to itself, when the rituals become muscle memory, when the sacred texts feel like eulogies, and when holiness tastes like ash. Theophilosophical silence is not the result of logic. It is the child of yearning. The person who feels it may have once believed deeply. They may have knelt at altars, wept at the beauty of Scripture, felt their heart crack open at the thought of divine presence. But over time, the miracles faded, the signs stopped coming, the comfort turned cold, and in their place grew a silence so vast it felt like drowning in still air. There is no comfort here, only the paralyzing awareness that the deepest cries of the human heart may vanish into the cosmos like smoke, that there is no sacred ear listening, that our pain, our love, our songs, our dying breaths are not received by anything beyond us. They simply disperse like vibrations in an empty cathedral. And yet, some continue to speak into this void, not out of hope, but out of need, a need older than reason, older than language, because even when the silence is unbearable, to stop speaking would feel like death itself. Theophilosophical silence is not just the absence of God, it is the presence of that absence, thick, aching, eternal, a silence that does not end, a silence that knows you're there and still says nothing. Oblivion Embrace. Oblivion Embrace is the dark serenity that arises when you stop running from non-existence and begin to welcome it. It is not the fear of death, but the slow, aching relief of imagining a world without your name, your face, your voice. It is the whisper that maybe the truest form of peace is not to be remembered, not to be missed, but simply to be gone, entirely, without residue, without echo, without self. This is not nihilism in its coldest sense. It is intimate, emotional, tender even. It is the exhaustion of having tried to find meaning in every corner of life, love, success, art, identity, and discovering only shadows that stretch, distort, and vanish the moment you reach for them. You stop searching, not because you gave up, but because you finally understand there is nothing to find. And in that realization, there is a softness, a letting go. To embrace oblivion is to imagine what it would feel like to no longer need to be, to no longer perform, explain, justify, or hope, to no longer carry the weight of your memories, your failures, your ever-fracturing identity. The mind, so loud with wanting, finally still. The body, so desperate to continue, finally quiet. No more striving, no more need, just the infinite calm of never again. There is something sacred in this thought, not suicidal, not despairing, just still, a longing for the kind of silence deeper than any sleep, where not even dreams remain. You imagine a world that goes on without you, not worse, not better, simply unbothered by your absence, and it feels like mercy. This embrace is not dramatic. It doesn't come with tears or declarations. It comes in quiet moments, staring at a ceiling in the dark, watching strangers pass by without noticing you, realizing how little of you will remain once you're gone, and instead of panic, you feel a soft exhale, a readiness, a recognition that perhaps the greatest kindness the universe can offer is the promise that one day you will be nothing again. No judgment, no waiting, just the great dark hush of oblivion, arms open, and for once you want to fall into them. Recursive dread. Recursive dread is the psychological spiral in which fear is no longer about something external. It is fear of fear itself, horror that folds in on itself like an origami of despair. It is not a scream at the darkness, but the realization that the scream is the darkness and that it echoes forever inward. You are not afraid of the unknown. You are afraid of the fact that you are afraid and that there is no bottom to it. Only more layers, more echoes, more dread reflected in dread. This is not anxiety in its common form. It is not the fear of death or failure or loss. Recursive dread is the deeper, more insidious terror that arises when you begin to fear your own mind's capacity to generate terror endlessly. It is standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing the abyss is inside you. The more you try to escape it, the more you think about it, and the more you think, the deeper you fall. You try to trace it back, to name it. Maybe it started as an existential fear, the recognition that life is meaningless, that death is inevitable, but then something turns. You begin to fear the process of recognizing that meaninglessness. You fear what it's doing to you. You fear what kind of thoughts your mind might create next. It feeds itself. The more aware you become of the fear, the more it grows. The more it grows, the more aware you become. And unlike other fears, there is no relief, no catharsis, because this dread doesn't come from outside. It lives in the core of your cognition, masquerading as logic, feeding off every attempt to understand it. It disguises itself as insight. You begin to distrust comfort because you felt the rug pulled before. You begin to distrust joy because you know the fall is coming. You begin to distrust your own thoughts because what if they're the ones causing this? Recursive dread is a closed circuit with no off switch. It is the horror of a mind trapped in its own feedback loop, where every exit is a mirror, and every mirror reflects another layer of fear, and it whispers one thing endlessly: this will never end. Paradoxical freedom. Paradoxical freedom is the devastating realization that you are free, but that this freedom is both limitless and unbearable. It is the raw, vertigo-inducing awareness that nothing is stopping you, nothing is guiding you, and nothing is waiting for you. You can do anything, become anything, believe anything, because nothing matters enough to stop you. And in that infinite possibility lies not liberation, but a kind of crushing emptiness. This is the freedom that existentialists warned us about, the kind that arrives when the universe is revealed to be silent, godless, and absurd. No purpose is handed down, no destiny awaits, no cosmic plan exists to tether your choices. You are terrifyingly free to act, to define, to destroy, to walk away. But without meaning, every option collapses into sameness. Every path leads nowhere in particular, and the weight of inventing significance where none exists begins to feel like a punishment masquerading as a gift. Paradoxical freedom is not about doing what you want. It's the nightmare that even wanting is untethered. How do you choose a direction when all roads dissolve beneath your feet? How do you commit to anything when every commitment is arbitrary? People speak of freedom as a light, but here it feels like drowning in an ocean with no shore, nothing holding you down and nothing to swim toward. This kind of freedom isolates. It strips away the scaffolding that made you feel real: culture, belief, morality, identity. You begin to wonder if your thoughts are even yours, or if they're just fragments of language and memory stitched together by a nervous system desperate for narrative. You realize you are both the prisoner and the warden, the sculptor and the clay, condemned to shape a self you'll never fully believe in. And yet the world goes on. People smile, marry, fight, pray. You watch them as if through glass, haunted by the knowledge that they too are free. But most will never feel the horror of it. You did. You saw the truth. You stood before the terrifying altar of absolute autonomy and understood you are free to do anything, and no one, not even the universe, will care if you do nothing. Negative theology. Negative theology, also known as apophatic theology, is the quiet unraveling of language before the presence or absence of the divine. It is the philosophy that says we cannot say what God is, only what God is not. It is the conviction that the ultimate, the infinite, the truly sacred lies beyond comprehension, beyond concept, beyond the grasp of even our most poetic metaphors. And the closer you draw to it, the more words fail, until all that remains is silence trembling with awe or dread. This is not atheism, nor is it faith in the traditional sense. It is deeper, colder, more honest. It begins with reverence, but ends in erasure. You start by trying to define the divine, to contain it within doctrine, image, or prayer. But slowly, painfully, you realize each word distorts, each idea limits, each attempt to capture the divine in thought reduces it into something small, something false. What is holy cannot be spoken, because to speak it is to destroy it. Negative theology is the spiritual version of staring into a black hole. You cannot describe it, not because it is absent, but because its presence is too vast, too other, too real to be known through the fragile filter of human thought. It is not just that God is unknowable, it is that even the word God becomes a kind of blasphemy, a placeholder for a mystery so total that to name it is to betray it. The deeper you go into this theology, the more you lose. You shed not just your certainties, but your questions, not just your beliefs, but the part of you that needed belief to feel secure. You begin to see prayer not as conversation, but as surrender, not asking for answers, but daring to exist before an abyss that will never speak back. And in that stillness, something terrifying happens. You are left alone with nothing but your own unknowing. no divine hand to hold, no voice to guide, no promise of meaning, only the unbearable purity of absence. And in that absence, perhaps something sacred breathes, or perhaps not. But either way, there is no longer anything you can say. Radical otherness. Radical otherness is the shattering encounter with that which is so utterly alien, so fundamentally unlike anything you know, that your mind cannot fully grasp it, only recoil. It is not the unfamiliar that frightens you, but the ungraspable, the thing that lies outside language, outside identity, outside the human shape of thought. It is the sense that there are forces, beings, or truths not just beyond your understanding, but beyond your right to understand. This isn't the simple fear of strangers or the discomfort of foreignness. Radical otherness is existential, a confrontation with something that does not share your logic, your morality, your perception of time, your sense of being. It's the vertigo you feel when you realize the universe doesn't think in words, doesn't feel in emotions, and doesn't recognize your human categories. The moment you look into the eyes of something and know this is not a reflection, this is not a mirror, this is not even a window. To encounter radical otherness is to feel the fragile illusion of human centrality tear apart. We move through the world imagining that it is shaped for us, that consciousness, empathy, death, even love are somehow universal. But radical otherness laughs at that. It shows you that what you are is just one way of being, and maybe not even the most interesting one, maybe not even the most real one. This concept can manifest as spiritual, cosmic, or interpersonal terror. The idea that God, if it exists, may not be good, that sentient life elsewhere in the cosmos might communicate in screams or silence, that a stranger might carry a truth so incompatible with yours that to share a conversation would be a kind of violence. It is the horror of the unknowable, not because it is hidden, but because it is incompatible with the human condition. Radical otherness doesn't threaten to destroy you with force. It threatens to erase your relevance. It shows you what it means to be truly small, not just in scale, but in perspective. It does not seek to be understood. It simply is. And your terror arises from realizing that maybe it never even noticed you at all. Infernal Eternalism. Infernal Eternalism is the nightmarish belief that suffering is not only inescapable, but eternal, repeating forever, without mercy, growth, or release. It is the philosophy that time is not a river, but a closed loop, a cursed wheel spinning endlessly through torment, dragging every moment of agony back into being, again and again, without end, without reason. It is the idea that hell is not a place, but existence itself, stretched across an infinite canvas of recurrence where every scream you've ever released will echo into eternity. This is not punishment. There is no judgment, no divine justice, no cosmic lesson. Infernal Eternalism strips away redemption, karma, and closure. It leaves only repetition, a universe where trauma is not healed but replayed, where death is not escape but reset. Every failure, every heartbreak, every humiliation, it returns, and you feel it freshly and fully, as if for the first time, every time. Memory becomes prophecy, pain becomes law. This is not the poetic beauty of Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, where you are urged to live in a way you would gladly repeat. Infernal Eternalism spits on that idea, because you will repeat it, whether you want to or not. Even your joy is poisoned, because as soon as you feel it, you know it must end, and after it ends, the cycle will bring it back, only to take it away again. The pendulum never stops. The blade never dulls. You are trapped in a theater of endless return, where suffering is the script and time is the prison. You may try to deny it, to say it's just a thought experiment, but the longer you sit with it, the more it seeps in. Every moment begins to shimmer with dread. You can no longer enjoy peace, because peace is just the pause before the cycle restarts, and it always restarts. The horror of infernal eternalism isn't just the duration of suffering, it's the certainty of its recurrence, a cosmic sadism embedded into the very nature of time itself. No savior comes, no narrative arc resolves, no awakening arrives, just the spinning of the wheel, grinding everything beautiful into ash, and then spinning again, forever. Emptiness Essentialism. Emptiness Essentialism is the devastating belief that the core essence of all things, of self, of life, of reality, is not fullness, not purpose, but void. It is not that meaning has been lost or forgotten, but that it was never there to begin with. Beneath every structure we cling to, beneath every identity, every desire, every fleeting joy, there is not depth, not foundation, only a silent hollowness that pulses through existence like a hidden heartbeat. This is a philosophy that doesn't flirt with despair, it is born from it. Emptiness, essentialism, begins where disillusionment ends, when the narratives you've held onto collapse, when the love you gave everything to fails, when the future becomes a blank page you no longer wish to write on. It's not an accident, it's not misfortune, it's a glimpse of the truth, that at the heart of everything is nothing, that the universe does not rest on purpose, but on absence. This isn't nihilism that screams or breaks glass. This is the kind that sits with you in the quiet hours, when the music stops, when the laughter fades, when you're alone and the silence doesn't feel empty, it feels honest. The more you search for essence in people, in moments, in yourself, the more you find mass covering mass, until there's nothing left but a thin, aching silence. And suddenly, it clicks. The silence was the truth all along. Emptiness Essentialism does not rage against this realization. It accepts it, almost reverently. It sees the craving for identity as a desperate theater act, the hunger for meaning as a trick of evolutionary fear. Even the self, that cherished narrator of our lives, dissolves under scrutiny into memory fragments and mirrored roles. There was never a solid you beneath the surface, only patterns, only echoes. But this isn't pure despair. There is somehow a kind of sacredness in the hollow, a quiet reverence in knowing that all things, no matter how bright or brutal, are shaped by the void that cradles them. To embrace emptiness as the essence of all is to stop begging the universe for something it never promised. You learn to live not for meaning, but despite it. You stop waiting for something to fill you and begin to feel the strange, solemn beauty of being empty and enough. Suicidal Transcendence. Suicidal transcendence is the darkest edge of philosophical yearning, the idea that true liberation, ultimate freedom, or spiritual awakening might only be found through death. It is the belief that existence itself is the prison, and that the only door that leads out is the one marked exit. This is not mere despair, nor romanticized death wish. It is the terrifying, quiet conviction that to transcend the illusion, the noise, the ache of being, you must stop being altogether. At its core, suicidal transcendence is not a cry for help. It is a surrender to the silence beneath all things. It sees life as a labyrinth with no center, no goal, only corridors of recurring pain and fleeting pleasure that evaporate before they can be held. It recognizes the ego not as a tool of survival, but as a cage, trapping the soul in loops of desire, identity, contradiction, and decay. To awaken, it says, is not to expand the self, but to erase it. This is the unsettling inverse of mystical ecstasy, where saints dissolve into divine light. Suicidal transcendence dissolves into nothingness. It looks at enlightenment and asks, what if the final veil is not God, but the void? It doesn't seek reunion with the divine. It questions whether there was ever anything divine to return to. And in that questioning, it sees death not as an end, but as the cleansing, a final, irreversible act of freedom. It is a vision of peace so severe it annihilates the possibility of further experience. The soul longs not for heaven, nor reincarnation, nor cosmic unity, but for cessation, pure, unbroken stillness, no thought, no form, no witness, the kind of peace that only the absence of awareness can offer, a peace you can't taste until you no longer have a tongue, a truth you can't know until knowing itself dissolves. And yet, this idea terrifies because it tempts. It whispers in sleepless nights, in depressive spirals, in moments of sharp clarity. You could be free, not healed, not redeemed, not fulfilled, just gone. And in that vanishing, maybe, just maybe, you touch something purer than anything life has ever offered, or maybe you touch nothing. Either way, it would finally be over. Negentropy Worship. Negentropy worship is a dark, awestruck reverence for the fleeting defiance of order in a universe ruled by chaos. It is the spiritual fixation on resistance, the worship not of gods or morality, but of systems, minds, and moments that push back against the universal tide of decay. It sees every spark of thought, every fragile structure, every breath of consciousness as a miracle, not because they are eternal, but because they stand, even briefly, against the infinite pull of entropy. To understand this philosophy is to feel the cold truth of physics at an emotional level. Everything tends toward disorder. All life, all love, all meaning is temporary scaffolding against the collapse. The universe doesn't hate us. It just doesn't care. It wants everything to break down, fall apart, dissolve into heat and static. And yet, here we are, breathing, thinking, trying. Every heartbeat is an act of rebellion. Negentropy, the force of negative entropy, is not a law, but an anomaly. It is the island of improbable structure in a sea of inevitable ruin. The human mind, with its fragile hopes and obsessions, is a furnace of negentropy burning against the dark. And this struggle, this brief and doomed defiance, becomes sacred in the eyes of the one who worships it. Negentropy. Worship doesn't romanticize permanence. It honors persistence. The moment a cell divides, the second a child learns a word, the click of logic in a mathematical proof, the fragile equilibrium of a mind trying not to collapse, these are holy, not because they last, but because they shouldn't exist at all. And yet, they do, for a moment. This belief is not hopeful. It does not promise salvation. It does not deny that everything ends. It looks straight at the heat death of the universe and kneels, not in surrender, but in reverence. Because what you are, the mind reading this, the hand that writes, the trembling organism holding itself together, you are negentropy. You are the flame rising for no reason except that it can, even as the cold waits to snuff it out. Negentropy worship is not the denial of doom. It is the holy devotion to what resists it, a quiet faith in the fire that burns brightest when it knows it cannot win. Antic Melancholy. Antic melancholy is the deep, slow sadness that arises not from loss or grief or trauma, but from being itself. It is the sorrow that seeps through the cracks of existence, not because something is wrong, but because everything is. It's the quiet despair of waking up again and again to the unbearable fact that you are, without ever having asked to be. It is not depression in the clinical sense. It is ontological, woven into the very fabric of reality, bleeding through the skin of consciousness like a bruise with no visible cause. This melancholy does not scream or rage. It lingers, it sighs, it colors every experience, even the beautiful ones, with the faint taste of impermanence. A sunset becomes a wound. A child's laughter becomes an echo. Love becomes a countdown. You begin to feel like a ghost wearing a body, performing routines not because they matter, but because you don't know what else to do. And beneath it all is the quiet ache. This is what being is? This is all? Antic melancholy whispers that the world is not broken. It is simply empty, not void of things, but void of grounding, The chair, the room, your hand, your breath, it's all there, and yet it doesn't feel real. It lacks weight. It passes through you like vapor, like dreams that refuse to solidify. Even your own self feels like a temporary arrangement of impressions held together by willpower alone. This is not nihilism. It doesn't deny meaning. It aches because it longs for meaning and finds none that lasts. It's the sadness of looking at a universe that never asks for you, that continues without you, that doesn't even notice you. You are not rejected. You are unacknowledged. And in that absence of response, your very being begins to hum with a kind of grief so fundamental, so silent, it becomes indistinguishable from your own heartbeat. Antic Melancholy is the tear that falls for no reason while washing the dishes. The silence after laughter that feels heavier than the joke was ever light. The way the world continues turning, indifferent, mechanical, majestic, and never once pauses to ask how it feels to be you. Anti-Phenomenology. Anti-Phenomenology is a rebellion against the sacred status of experience. It is the unsettling belief that subjective consciousness, our cherished window into the world, our inner narrative of being, is not a truth to be honored, but a distortion to be distrusted. Where phenomenology elevates perception and the lived experience as the foundation of meaning, anti-phenomenology rips it all down, exposing awareness itself as a trap, a beautifully rendered illusion that tricks us into thinking we are at the center, when in truth we are lost in reflection. This philosophy views consciousness not as a miracle, but as a malfunction, an accidental byproduct of evolution that mistakes its own echo chamber for reality. To the anti-phenomenologist, what we feel, what we see, what we remember, none of it is reliable. None of it is real in any meaningful sense. Experience is just noise, shaped by biology, culture, trauma, and error. Your identity, an aesthetic built from recycled language and flawed perception. Your emotions, neurochemical performances without script or audience. Anti-phenomenology doesn't deny that we have experiences. It denies that experiences mean anything, that they reveal anything deeper than the machinery grinding behind our skulls. The warmth of a sunset, the ache of love, the horror of grief, these are not truths. They are data spikes in a brain desperate to tell itself a story it can believe. Phenomenology asks what it feels like to be. Anti-phenomenology replies, irrelevant. To believe this is to sit with the quiet terror that nothing you've ever felt was true in the way you hoped, that your entire life, your tastes, your memories, your you, was built on fog, not maliciously, not even tragically, just mechanically. You were wired this way, programmed, told where to find beauty and how to interpret pain, and now you stare back at your own reflection, not in wonder, but in suspicion. Who is watching whom? This isn't detachment, it's dissection. Anti-phenomenology peels back the skin of the soul to reveal not light but circuitry, not insight but interference. It is the eerie, numbing realization that perception is not a doorway to truth, but a mirror house with no exit. And the more you look inward for something real, the more you drown in the awareness that you are looking at nothing but the architecture of illusion. Thanatological ontology. Thanatological ontology is the philosophy that places death, not life, at the center of existence. It is the study of being through the lens of dying, the understanding that to exist is to decay in real time. Rather than viewing death as a boundary or an endpoint, this philosophy sees it as the fundamental condition of being. You are not simply going to die, you are dying always. Every breath is a subtle exit, every heartbeat a drumbeat toward erasure. Being is not a gift, it is a slow disappearance in motion. This is not morbidity for the sake of darkness. It is clarity. It is the stripping away of illusions that comfort us into thinking life is the default and death the interruption. Thanatological ontology says, no, death is the rule and life is the brief resistance. You are a fragile flicker against an infinite darkness, and that flicker is already flickering out. In this philosophy, you don't look at life from the perspective of potential, but from the inevitability of loss. You don't ask, what can I become? You ask, what will be lost first? Your body is a vanishing process. Your memories are slowly rotting the moment they're formed. Your name will be forgotten. Your thoughts will fade, and even your sorrow will eventually be swallowed by time. And yet, you must live with the knowledge of this unraveling every single day. Thanatological ontology doesn't offer answers. It offers a mirror, and in that mirror, you see not only your future corpse, but the emptiness that was there before you were born, the abyss from which you came and to which you will return. And somewhere in that reflection is the cruel truth. You never truly owned your life. You were only renting it, and the bill comes due in every passing moment. It leaves you with the most painful kind of awareness that everything you love is temporary, that every relationship is a future grief, every joy a dying flame, and it dares to ask you to be, knowing all of this. Not because there is meaning, but because there is not. Death is the only constant, and being is simply how we endure it, one slow second at a time. Infinite regression of suffering. Infinite regression of suffering is the abyssal realization that pain is not a singular event to endure or a phase to transcend, but a self-replicating pattern, an eternal loop that folds back onto itself, birthing new forms of agony from every attempt to escape it. It is the sensation that suffering does not end. It spawns. Each solution becomes its own problem, each healing its own wound, each breath of relief a prelude to another collapse. It begins when you try to fix yourself. You chase clarity to escape confusion, only to find the clarity unbearable. You seek love to heal loneliness, only to discover how terrifying it is to lose what you've finally found. You numb your trauma, but numbness becomes its own kind of torment. Even joy can't save you, because joy is fragile, and its fragility becomes yet another source of dread. Every ladder you climb turns into a spiral. Every light leads to a darker tunnel. You don't suffer once. You suffer the realization that you will suffer again and again and again. This regression is not just personal. It's historical, cultural, universal. Wars end only to prepare the soil for new wars. Generations vow not to repeat the past and then build new cages with the same old bones. We solve hunger and create isolation. We cure disease and breed disconnection. Each step forward, if it is a step at all, drips with the blood of some new wound. Humanity is not healing, it is looping. The horror of infinite regression is not in the suffering itself, but in the inescapability of it. There is no final catharsis, no lesson learned, no mountaintop from which you can look back and say, it's over, because even that mountaintop will crumble beneath your feet. Even peace decays into longing. Even understanding erodes into new questions that slice open the mind in fresh ways. You begin to feel it in your bones, that pain is not an interruption to life. It is life endlessly folding in on itself, reflecting its own shadow through every cracked mirror of your attempts to make sense of it. And the cruelest part of all is this: even knowing the pattern doesn't break it. Awareness becomes another layer of the trap, a scream echoing forever down a hallway that has no end. The aesthetic of suffering. The aesthetic of suffering is the unsettling idea that pain possesses a kind of beauty, not despite its brutality, but because of it. It is the recognition that agony, despair, and human fragility create something hauntingly sublime. This is not romanticization. It is not the naive glamorizing of sorrow. It is the raw, emotional pull towards suffering's intensity, toward the way it carves meaning into flesh, reveals truth in silence, and stains experience with a depth that joy rarely touches. There is something almost sacred in the broken, in the way a face looks mid-tear, in the trembling hands of someone trying to hold themselves together, in the scream that can't be voiced but echoes anyway in the hollows of the body. Suffering doesn't hide, it strips us bare, it forces honesty, it reduces us to something primal, something terrifyingly real, and in that moment we are closer to something true than we ever are in comfort. Art has always known this. The great paintings, the poetry that lives under your skin, the songs that make you weep without knowing why, they are soaked in sorrow. We gravitate toward tragedy not out of morbidity, but because it reflects something in us that feels more essential than happiness. Suffering is the proof that we feel, that we exist, that there is something inside worth breaking. The aesthetic of suffering is also terrifying because it complicates our moral compass. When we find beauty in suffering, does that make us complicit? When we admire the haunted eyes of a war photograph, are we honoring the pain or consuming it? This philosophy doesn't give comfort. It challenges you to look at the wound and admit it's beautiful, and then ask yourself, why? It is the tremor beneath the elegance, the red behind the rose, the awareness that even our most cherished expressions, love, sacrifice, longing, only gain their intensity through the threat of loss. That pain is not the opposite of beauty, but often its source, and in our darkest moments, we sometimes don't seek relief. We seek witnessing, to be seen in our suffering, to be art in our agony, to bleed in a way that at least leaves a mark. Temporal entrapment. Temporal entrapment is the crushing sensation of being chained to time, of living not in time, but under it. It is the relentless awareness that you are always either too late, too early, or never truly present, that each moment slips through your fingers the second you try to hold it, and the more you try to live, the more life becomes a vanishing point. You are haunted not just by the past or the future, but by the impossibility of now. This isn't simply nostalgia or anxiety or fear of aging. It is the paralyzing recognition that time is not a medium you move through. It is a cage you cannot leave. You look back and ache for versions of yourself that no longer exist, even though you know they were never truly content. You look forward and see only echoes of your current dissatisfaction dressed in new costumes. You live each day as if trying to catch up to a life you should be living, as if you were always meant to be somewhere else, someone else, feeling something more, but the finish line keeps moving. You tell yourself you'll be okay once you graduate, once you heal, once you find them, once you leave, once you return. But time is not linear here. It spirals. You don't move forward, you orbit, and every return to hope becomes a return to disappointment. You are not chasing a future, you are dragged by it, forced to perform existence on a timeline that demands motion but offers no rest. There is no pause, no reset, no outside from which you can observe it all. Time mocks you with its indifference. It devours the people you love. It edits your memories without your consent. It writes your story in ink and dares you to rewrite it in blood. Even in your happiest moments, a clock ticks in the background, reminding you that everything you love is already becoming memory. Temporal entrapment is knowing that life is not just fleeting, it is ungraspable, that no matter how deeply you feel, how hard you try to capture it, the moment is already gone. You do not live in time. You bleed through it, drop by drop, unable to hold still long enough to remember who you were before the ticking began. Existence as error. Existence as error is the chilling belief that to be alive is not merely meaningless or accidental, but wrong. That life in its totality is a catastrophic malfunction of nature, a deviation from what should have never occurred. This is not pessimism. It is not despair. It is a metaphysical verdict that the fact of being, consciousness, sensation, identity, is a cosmic mistake. You should not be here. No one should. This philosophy does not ask, what is the purpose of life? It begins with the deeper, more disorienting question, why is there anything at all? And worse, why is what exists so broken, so violent, so cruel? It sees the act of existence not as a miracle, but as a glitch. The rise of life from dust, the emergence of awareness from flesh, the longing for meaning in a universe that will not answer, none of it is triumph. It is all failure, an error in the void. Existence as error is not nihilism because it doesn't just erase meaning, it indicts being itself. It suggests that reality is not neutral, but fundamentally corrupted, that the laws of physics, the chains of DNA, the wiring of the brain all conspire to create a kind of persistent torment that has no redemption. We are born to suffer, to decay, to fear, to forget, and all of this for nothing. This belief is most potent in moments of extreme clarity, the kind that arrive at 3 a.m. when the world is silent and your thoughts are too loud, when you see a child cry for no reason, when you watch someone die in sterile, fluorescent light, when you stare at yourself in the mirror and feel like a puppet pulled by strings you didn't choose. You feel it then, deep in the marrow. This isn't how it should be. Maybe this shouldn't be at all. It is a philosophy that lives in the silence after prayer, in the smile you force to hide the void, in the knowledge that joy is always accompanied by the shadow of its own ending. Existence as error doesn't want to fix the world. It doesn't believe in fixing. It sees every act of survival as persistence within a mistake, and every birth as the continuation of a sentence that should have never been written. Cosmic indifference. Cosmic indifference is the chilling recognition that the universe does not care. Not about you, not about your dreams, not about your pain, your triumphs, your heartbreaks, or your death. It is the brutal awareness that the stars shine, not for beauty, but because they are burning, that the sun rises not for hope, but out of blind gravitational precision, that the earth spins, seasons change, galaxies collide, all without the faintest whisper of regard for the human heart. This is not cruelty. Cruelty implies intention. The universe is not cruel, it is worse. It is utterly neutral. It does not know you are here. It does not listen when you scream. It does not mourn with you when your loved ones die. It does not celebrate when you fall in love, or win, or heal. And this neutrality, this absence of concern, is more terrifying than any malevolent God could ever be, because there is no one to appeal to, no one watching, no one coming. You were born into this vastness, flung into it without consent, told to find meaning, build identity, shape morality, all within a framework that was never designed for you, that never knew you. And every attempt to make sense of it, the stories, the religions, the philosophies, begins to crack under the cold silence of the stars. You realize that all meaning is projection, all comfort an illusion, all justice a fragile human wish. The universe owes you nothing, and it will take everything. Cosmic indifference is not just intellectual, it is visceral. It's the feeling you get standing beneath an endless night sky, realizing how small you are, how brief, how easily forgotten. It's the helplessness in knowing that in 1,000 years, your name won't exist, that everything you felt, everything you've built, will vanish like a spark that never reached a flame. And yet, you continue, you breathe, you love, you hurt, you try, not because it matters to the cosmos, it never will, but because you are the only one who can make it matter, not to the universe, just to yourself. In the face of that vast, infinite silence, you whisper back, not to be heard, but because you're still here, and that may be the only defiance you're allowed. Necrophilic consciousness. Necrophilic consciousness is the grotesque and deeply unsettling notion that human awareness is irresistibly drawn to death, not just in fear, but in fascination, desire, and even reverence. It is the idea that consciousness, in its most primal form, is not a force of life, but a mirror for decay, that the mind is not simply aware of death, it hungers for it, watches it, chases it, craves it. Like moths to flame, we orbit the end, unable to look away from the rot that waits beneath the surface of all things. This philosophy does not suggest we want to die. Rather, it asserts something more disturbing, that death is the gravitational center of our attention, that from our art to our politics, our entertainment to our ethics, we are obsessed with the dying, the ruined, the decomposed. We film war, we replay tragedy, we write songs about heartbreak, rot, and oblivion. We keep relics of the dead, build museums of bones, and sculpt angels atop graves. Necrophilic consciousness sees this not as culture, it sees it as confession, that underneath our celebration of life lies a raw, hidden intoxication with the lifeless, that we are not trying to escape mortality, but to touch it, to romanticize it, intellectualize it, and ultimately become intimate with it. We decorate corpses, we philosophize about the end, we fear death, yes, but we also worship it in silence. It is the reason we slow down at car crashes, the reason we feel something electric when we stand on the edge of a cliff, the reason apocalyptic fiction sells more than utopias. We are not just curious about death, we are inside it already, carrying it within us, tracing its edges every time we ask what it means to live. And perhaps the most terrifying suggestion necrophilic consciousness makes is this: what if consciousness itself emerged from death? What if our awareness, the very thing we celebrate as uniquely human, was born not from light or spirit, but from the brain's confrontation with its own limits, a wound that learned to look at itself, a mind sculpted in the shape of its own grave. And so we think, and we write, and we love, and all the while, somewhere in the depths of our thoughts, something is whispering, gently, lovingly, die. Apocalyptic Rationalism. Apocalyptic rationalism is the philosophy that follows logic to its most horrifying conclusion, not out of paranoia, but out of clarity. It is the belief that reason, stripped of illusion and wishful thinking, reveals a future that is not filled with light, but with collapse, not because of divine prophecy or mythic destiny, but because the numbers say so, the data confirms it, and our trajectory, when seen honestly, points not to salvation, but to endings. This is not hysteria, it is not doomsday cultism, it is the cold, sterile voice of the intellect saying, we are not going to make it. Climate models worsen, political systems calcify, technology outpaces morality, population surges while empathy withers. We build faster than we think, we consume faster than we can replenish. We know what must be done, but we don't do it, not because we can't, but because we won't. And the rational mind watches this pattern unfold, screaming in logic while the world distracts itself with comfort. Apocalyptic rationalism doesn't believe in sudden annihilation. It believes in slow unraveling, 1,000 paper cuts to civilization, ecosystems collapse, trust erodes, truth fractures, systems built to protect begin to consume. It sees that every solution we reach for is either too late, too small, or too profitable to resist corruption. It accepts that we are not waiting for the end. We are in it. This is not the prelude to disaster. This is the disaster, and we've just normalized its early stages. It is not a lack of faith in humanity. It is the inevitable outcome of understanding humanity too well. Our drives, our greed, our pride, our short-sightedness, the way we laugh at warnings until they burn down the house, the way we treat symptoms while feeding the cause, the way we invent just enough meaning to keep ourselves from doing what's necessary, and then invent excuses for why we didn't. Apocalyptic rationalism hurts because it's not crazy. It is reason stripped of comfort. It is the moment when intelligence no longer reassures but condemns. When the smarter you are, the less you believe in a happy ending. And in that realization, there's a final terrifying question. If logic leads only to collapse, then what's left to guide us? Faith, denial, or nothing at all? Absence idealism. Absence idealism is the haunting philosophy that what is most real, most true, is not what exists, but what is absent. It is the idea that the defining feature of reality is not presence, not matter, not sensation, but the gaps, the voids, the hollows that surround and shape everything. It does not deny the world. It denies that the world is complete, and it suggests that what we long for, what we seek, what we are at our core, is shaped by what is missing. This is not a pessimistic worldview. It is not simply sadness over what isn't. It is a metaphysical re-evaluation of what is. You are defined more by your desires than your achievements, more by your losses than your possessions. The people who haunt your memory shape you more than those who remain. The silence between words carries more weight than the words themselves, and deep within your being is a quiet, unnameable void that nothing ever quite fills. Absence idealism doesn't claim this is a flaw. It says this is the design, that reality itself is incomplete by nature, that beauty stuns us because it's fleeting, that love wrecks us because it can't be held, that fulfillment always lives just one breath beyond our reach. It tells us the soul is not a vessel to be filled, but an echo chamber for everything that never quite arrived. You live your life chasing forms, goals, people, meaning, but it is always the absence trailing behind them that moves you. The missed chances, the unborn futures, the moments you didn't know were your last. You are drawn to the spaces between things, the empty chair, the quiet after the song, the smell of someone no longer there. This philosophy does not comfort, it reveals that our hearts are tuned not to the presence of what we love, but to its disappearance. And perhaps the most painful implication of absence idealism is this, that we might never truly want what we have. We only want what we can almost touch, what we just lost, what could have been. That reality is a masterpiece of subtraction, and that to be human is to ache endlessly for what was never there. Ethics of non-existence. The ethics of non-existence is the radical moral philosophy that asks the most forbidden question. Is it wrong to bring someone into being, not in a tragic or religious sense, but in a cold, ethical one? It proposes that the greatest harm is existence itself, and that to avoid creating life is not a failure, but a moral triumph. It is not hatred for humanity, it is profound compassion, sharpened by a brutal clarity. If life guarantees suffering, then to prevent life is to prevent harm. This idea is born from a simple inversion of conventional morality, where society says birth is a gift. This philosophy says it's an imposition. Where others see life as sacred, it sees life as a risk, forced upon the voiceless. The unborn cannot consent. They are thrust into a world where they will suffer, emotionally, physically, existentially, and eventually die. Even the happiest life ends in loss, and often carries pain too vast to measure. What right do we have to inflict that? The ethics of non-existence does not focus on the already living. It focuses on the yet to be born. It does not argue that people should die. It argues that they should never have been. It is not driven by despair, but by responsibility. If we can prevent the existence of future beings who would feel pain, heartbreak, loneliness, illness, fear, and death, shouldn't we? Is that not the deepest form of mercy? This philosophy is chilling not because it glorifies death, but because it removes every comforting myth around life. It does not care about legacy, evolution, or the beauty of human achievement. It sees behind every masterpiece the hand that trembled with grief, behind every birth, a future corpse, behind every love, inevitable mourning, and it whispers, it didn't have to be this way. What makes the ethics of non-existence unbearable to most is that it doesn't leave room for redemption. There is no "but life is worth it" clause, no suffering builds character loophole. It asks you to look at a crying child, a war-torn city, a hospital bed, and consider that none of this pain ever needed to exist. That maybe the highest kindness was the kindness never to create, a love so extreme it chose absence over agony, silence over screams, nothing over everything. Metaethical despair. Metaethical despair is the collapse not of morality, but of the possibility of morality. It is the agonizing realization that even our deepest moral convictions may have no foundation, that right and wrong are not discovered truths, but invented stories, subjective, cultural, accidental. And when the illusion of objective morality fades, it doesn't leave behind liberation. It leaves ruin, a psychological implosion where ethical clarity turns to ash, and you are left staring into a void where meaning once stood. This despair begins when you realize morality is not written into the structure of the universe. There are no cosmic laws, no divine scorekeeper, no inherent justice woven into the bones of being. Morality is a language made by apes afraid of their own violence. We made it up, out of fear, out of love, out of necessity, but made up all the same. And once you see this, truly feel it, something within you begins to unravel. You remember moments where you acted with conviction, defended someone, forgave someone, sacrificed something. You thought it mattered. You thought it was right. But now a voice inside you whispers, what if it wasn't? What if there is no right? Not just no agreement, but no ground. Not even in reason, not even in empathy, just preferences dressed in moral language, just instincts dressed in principles. Metaethical despair doesn't just poison philosophy, it infects your life. You start to question your outrage at injustice. You question your grief, your compassion, your guilt. You question whether evil even exists, or if it's just another word we use to name what we hate. The suffering is still real, but the framework that told you it was wrong begins to flicker, and in that flicker, you begin to lose your grip on everything that once felt certain. This isn't moral relativism, it is the death of moral faith, and unlike nihilism, it doesn't shrug, it hurts. It aches with the knowledge that humans still bleed, still cry, still yearn for goodness, but maybe goodness itself is a myth, a comforting hallucination we keep whispering to each other in the dark so we don't lose our minds completely. Metaethical despair is not hopelessness, it is hope, peeled raw and left to rot. It is the moment you realize there may be no moral truth to stand on, only choices, only consequences, and a silence that never tells you if you chose well. Void-centered ethics. Void-centered ethics is the philosophy that begins not with duty, virtue, or consequence, but with nothingness. It is an ethical framework built on the absence of meaning, the hollowness of value, and the ultimate emptiness of existence. Rather than viewing the void as a threat to morality, it makes the void its foundation, an acknowledgement that since there are no absolute truths, no divine laws, no cosmic scales of justice, our ethics must emerge from that very abyss. It is a morality forged not in the light of purpose, but in the shadow of indifference. There is no grand design, no intrinsic value to life, no objective reason why pain should matter or joy should be preserved. And yet, here we are, thinking, feeling, hurting, surrounded by others who do the same. Void-centered ethics says, precisely because nothing matters, everything is at stake. This paradox is what makes the philosophy so haunting. If there is no reason to be kind, no eternal reward for being good, no punishment for cruelty, then every moral act becomes its own silent miracle. To choose compassion in a meaningless world is to rebel against the void itself. To refuse harm when there is no divine law to stop you is the birth of a terrifying freedom, and that freedom is pure responsibility. Void-centered ethics doesn't rely on tradition or utility. It demands a kind of radical empathy born from existential lucidity. You are alone in an empty universe, just like everyone else. You will die, just like everyone else. You are terrified, aching, yearning, just like everyone else. From that shared, senseless condition, the ethics arise, not because they are written into the stars, but because we suffer, and in suffering we find each other. This philosophy holds no hope of salvation, no vision of utopia. It offers no justification for morality beyond the trembling connection between fragile minds adrift in the same darkness. You do good, not because it matters, but because you've seen what it's like when no one does. You help not because there's a reason, but because the absence of reason is exactly why it's sacred. In the void, every kindness is a quiet defiance, every mercy a match struck against the cold. Annihilation idealism. Annihilation idealism is the paradoxical belief that the highest state of being, the purest form of truth, peace, or enlightenment, is found not in existence, but in its obliteration. It is the conviction that to fully awaken is to vanish, that reality, as we know it, is a flawed mirage, and the ultimate act of transcendence is not to master it, but to dissolve completely within it, not through violence, not through despair, but through a radical spiritual surrender that sees non-being as the highest form of being. This is not a cult of death. It is not suicide cloaked in metaphor. Annihilation idealism is a philosophical and metaphysical yearning to unbe. It arises when you begin to feel that selfhood is a distortion, that consciousness is a burden, and that form itself is a mistake. Every thought, every desire, every identity is seen as noise, ripples across a surface that longs to go still. You are not trying to die. You are trying to disappear in a sacred way, to melt back into the source, if there ever was one. It begins with the sense that the world is too much, too loud, too separate. The friction of being becomes unbearable. You see through the ego, and what's beneath it is not a higher self, but a profound nothing. And instead of fearing it, you begin to love it, to want it. The idea of merging with it becomes ecstasy, because only in that annihilation is the lie of separation undone. Only in that silence is truth finally unmasked. Annihilation, idealism, touches mysticism, but removes the divine. It touches Buddhism, but leaves behind the compassion. It is a cold, pure longing to vanish into the unformed. It tells you that freedom isn't found in expression, it's found in erasure, that to be whole, you must first become empty, that the final liberation is not becoming everything, but becoming nothing at all. And what makes this philosophy so disturbingly beautiful is that it doesn't come from hatred. It comes from love, love for stillness, for truth, for that pure, unreachable clarity that no word can touch and no mind can hold. It is not suicide. It is salvation, but one that leaves behind no witness, no trace, no self to say, I was here. Samsaric repetition. Samsaric repetition is the crushing cycle of birth, suffering, death, and rebirth that defines existence, not as progress, but as trap. It is the spiritual treadmill from which no awakening seems to come, no matter how far you walk. Drawn from the ancient concept of samsara in Indian philosophy, it is the notion that life does not move forward. It turns in endless circles. You live, you hurt, you die, and then you do it all again. Not once, not twice, but endlessly. This is not reincarnation as comfort. It is not the soothing idea that we return with purpose or peace. Samsaric repetition says, you are returned without memory, without choice, without rest. You are dragged back into flesh, into craving, into illusion. Every lifetime is a reset with the same outcome: aging, sickness, death. You fall in love knowing it will rot. You build only to see your work erased. You learn only to forget again. The wheel does not reward you for effort. it simply turns. This philosophy is not metaphor. It is warning that your longing for meaning, your chasing of pleasure, your fear of pain are not signs of life, but signs of bondage. You are not alive. You are bound. And the worst part, you wanted this. Some part of you clung to identity, to ego, to self, and in that clinging, you tied yourself to the wheel. There is no comfort in escape either, because even liberation, moksha, nirvana, feels distant, abstract, like a promise whispered through smoke. The more you strive for freedom, the more you reinforce the idea of a self who wants to be free, and the wheel turns again. Every desire becomes a chain, every attachment, a hook. Even your suffering is part of the system. It fuels it. Samsaric repetition isn't cruel in the human sense. It has no malice. It is simply mechanism. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't know you. You cry out and it echoes with silence. You beg for a reason and it hands you another lifetime, another birth, another scream. It is not a curse cast by gods. It is the condition of being, and once you see it, not as myth, but as structure, you stop hoping for rescue. You simply watch the wheel spin, and in that spinning, something inside you either breaks or begins to vanish. Negative freedom. Negative freedom is the kind of freedom that feels like a curse. It is not the liberty to do what you want. It is the absence of external constraint, the bare condition of being left alone, untouched, unshaped, unclaimed. It is the realization that freedom, in its most stripped-down form, is a void. You are not guided. You are not protected. You are not told what to do. And while that sounds like liberation, in practice it often feels like abandonment. This philosophy doesn't celebrate freedom. It interrogates its shadow. It asks what happens when all the walls fall down, all the authorities disappear, and no one tells you who to be. At first, it feels empowering, but then comes the dread, because now you are the one responsible for your choices, for your failures, for your life. There is no one to blame, no destiny to trust, no God to lean on. You are radically free, and therefore radically alone. Negative freedom strips you bare. It doesn't give you meaning. It takes away everything that prevented you from seeing that meaning was never guaranteed. It whispers, you can do anything, and then leaves you staring into a vast, indifferent silence where nothing compels you except your own will, which is uncertain, fractured, lost. There is no script, no savior, no structure, just you and the terrifying open sky. This freedom is not about rebellion. It's not about escaping tyranny. It's about existing in a state where no one is holding you back, because no one is holding you at all. You're free to walk away from every relationship, every job, every belief. Free to destroy your life or redeem it. Free to make meaning or to rot in the absence of it. And no one will stop you. That is the deal. That is the burden. Negative freedom haunts modern life. You feel it in the aimlessness of adulthood, in the pressure to find yourself in a world that offers no clues, in the way choice becomes suffocating, not liberating, in the quiet panic behind the question, what am I supposed to do now? And the most devastating part is, no one's coming to answer, because you're free, completely. And in that freedom lies the possibility of everything, and the weight of absolutely nothing. Anti-value philosophy. Anti-value philosophy is the radical rejection of all assumed worth, not just of moral systems or cultural ideals, but of the very concept of value itself. It is the belief that nothing possesses inherent significance, that all standards of beauty, goodness, truth, or purpose are not only arbitrary, but dangerous illusions used to sedate the mind and stabilize a reality built on nothing. Where nihilism merely claims nothing matters, anti-value philosophy goes further. Nothing should. This is not rebellion. It is disassembly. Anti-value thought doesn't rage against society's ideals. It dismantles the foundations on which ideals are built. It sees value as a lie layered over the void, a desperate framework designed to tame chaos and protect consciousness from the horror of unfiltered existence. To say something has worth, life, love, knowledge, justice, is to participate in a consensual hallucination that keeps the void at bay. Anti-value philosophy tears off the veil and stares directly into the nothing. It asserts that the things we cling to, morality, progress, meaning, success, are not virtues but coping mechanisms. They are inherited myths, perpetuated by institutions and internalized so deeply that we forget they were ever invented. Even suffering has been twisted into a narrative of growth, but anti-value thinking sees suffering not as transformative, but as raw fact, not noble, not meaningful, just pain, unjustified, unredeemed, unnecessary. This philosophy is not liberating in the conventional sense. It doesn't offer a higher truth or alternative purpose. It denies the need for truth and purpose. It asks, disturbingly, what if all systems of value, ethical, aesthetic, existential, are simply the scaffolding of delusion? What if everything is just happening, without hierarchy, without narrative, without reason? Anti-value philosophy is not apathetic. It is surgical. It cuts through sentiment, through tradition, through language itself, revealing a reality that does not care, does not compare, does not reward. A reality where love is chemical noise, art is ornamented decay, and justice is a story we tell to keep the abyss from laughing too loud. To embrace anti-value is to fall without reaching for meaning, to stop asking what things are worth, and finally accept that they never had any worth to begin with, not because they are worthless, but because value itself is the original lie. Tragic epistemology is the philosophy that knowledge, true, deep, unflinching knowledge, is not a path to liberation, but to sorrow. It is the belief that the more we come to understand the world, ourselves, and the mechanisms of reality, the more we are confronted with truths that wound, not heal. It holds that the pursuit of wisdom, often idolized as noble and redemptive, is in fact laced with inevitable heartbreak. To know deeply is to suffer deeply. This is not anti-intellectualism. It's not a rejection of reason or science. Tragic epistemology honors truth, but recognizes its cost. It sees knowledge as a double-edged blade, sharp enough to illuminate, but just as capable of slicing through the illusions that keep us sane. The myths we need to survive about goodness, meaning, permanence, human nature are the very ones dismantled by the quest for understanding. And when those myths fall, something inside us falls with them. It starts innocently, a question, a curiosity. You want to know, and then you do. You learn that love is chemically induced attachment, that history is written by victors, drenched in blood, that free will may be nothing more than brain chemistry, that morality is inconsistent, that justice is selective, that happiness is fleeting, and that you, this entire time, were clinging to dreams disguised as truths. The more the curtain lifts, the more the stage empties, until the show you once lived inside turns into a silent, echoing room. Tragic epistemology is the grief of the mind. It is the moment you realize that knowing something doesn't change it, doesn't fix it, doesn't even make it more bearable. You see the depth of human suffering, the vast indifference of the universe, the recursive futility of desire, and you cannot unsee it. Enlightenment, in this view, is not a light that lifts you. It's a flame that burns away your illusions until you stand naked before the real. And yet, you keep asking, keep reading, keep unraveling, because even in its devastation, there's a strange, sorrowful beauty to understanding. You become a witness to truth, to pain, to the raw architecture of existence. And in that witnessing, you lose something precious, your innocence, your hope, your comfort, but gain something more brutal, the kind of clarity that doesn't save you, but shows you what cannot be saved. Hopeless teleology. Hopeless teleology is the devastating realization that everything in existence moves towards something, but that the destination is meaningless or worse, catastrophic. It is the collapse of faith and purpose, not because there is no direction, but because the direction leads to ruin. It is the belief that the universe, life, history, and even consciousness are not static. They're progressing, but toward emptiness, extinction, or a final point where meaning fails entirely. The arrow of time is real, and it's aimed straight at oblivion. This philosophy emerges in the wreckage of every utopian dream. It asks, what if evolution isn't improvement? What if progress is not salvation, but decay in disguise? We build, we innovate, we grow, but with each advancement comes new complexity, new chaos, new forms of suffering. We reach for transcendence and find surveillance. We invent connection and become lonelier. Every step forward lights a path towards something larger, colder, emptier. Hopeless teleology doesn't deny structure. It sees it too clearly. It sees that systems are evolving, history is accelerating, and even human psychology is changing, but with no finish line worth crossing. You were born into a story already written, one that pushes forward no matter how hard you resist. The tragedy is not that we are lost, but that we are headed somewhere, and the destination is already too late to avoid. Even entropy, the slow death of all order, is a kind of teleology, a destination etched into the laws of physics. Stars collapse, memory fades, identity breaks down. The universe stretches out into cold, unreachable silence, not because it was punished, but because that's what it was always going to do. Just as you will age, just as you will lose, just as everything you love will slip through your fingers. The horror of hopeless teleology is not in chaos, but in inevitability. It's not that nothing makes sense, it's that everything does, and it all leads here, this moment, this unraveling, this awareness that no matter how much you hope, resist, or believe, the current will carry you forward, dragging your future behind it like a funeral shroud. There is a goal, there is an end, and it does not care if you arrive screaming or silent. You will arrive. Emotional determinism. Emotional determinism is the unsettling belief that we are not guided by reason, not steered by logic, not even shaped by choice, but driven entirely by emotion, that our thoughts, our values, our free will are all aftershocks of deeper, uncontrollable emotional currents. This philosophy doesn't say that emotions influence us, it says they own us, that every decision, every belief, every relationship is rooted not in clarity or intention, but in the primal, involuntary surges of feeling we barely understand. You do not choose to love. You do not decide what you fear. You do not construct what breaks you. These things rise up within you like tides, and your rational mind scrambles after them, justifying, organizing, pretending it was in control. Emotional determinism peels back the illusion of agency to reveal something raw. You are not the architect of your life. You are the weathered terrain across which emotional storms pass. It's in the way you defend beliefs, not because they're true, but because they comfort you. The way you cling to people who hurt you, not because you believe they'll change, but because your pain is familiar. The way you sabotage opportunities, not out of stupidity, but because something in you equates failure with safety. Emotional determinism doesn't say you're irrational. It says your rationality is built on emotional architecture. Every logic chain is wrapped in feeling. This isn't about weakness. It's about wiring. Your brain evolved to feel first, to react fast, to survive, not to understand. And even as we build civilizations, technologies, philosophies, we do so with the emotional DNA of frightened mammals. We want to be loved, to avoid shame, to feel powerful, to be seen. These are not desires we choose. They are forces that choose for us. And here lies the despair. if your emotions dictate your choices, and those emotions are shaped by trauma, by childhood, by biology, by things utterly beyond your control, then who are you really? A puppet pulled by feelings, masquerading as intentions? A vessel of ancient instincts dressed in modern language? Emotional determinism doesn't free you from responsibility. It leaves you with the unbearable weight of it, knowing that even your sense of control might be nothing more than an echo of a feeling you never asked to have. Mental entropy theory. Mental entropy theory is the bleak hypothesis that the human mind, like any complex system, is subject to inevitable internal decay, not from external damage, but from thought itself. It is the idea that the more we think, reflect, analyze, and construct meaning, the more we fragment, destabilize, and ultimately dissolve the coherence of our own consciousness. Awareness becomes a self-consuming fire. Each insight carries a cost. Each layer of introspection peels back the skin of the self, exposing more noise, more chaos, more unraveling. This is not poetic burnout. This is thermodynamics applied to identity. The mind, in its endless processing, builds internal complexity, but complexity invites disorder. With every experience, memory, contradiction, and belief we accumulate, we increase the likelihood of conflict, paradox, overload. Thought becomes less clarity, more static. You begin to repeat yourself. You begin to contradict yourself. You begin to lose the thread of who you were and who you're supposed to be. The story breaks down, not because you failed, but because too much was written. Mental entropy theory sees depression, dissociation, anxiety, identity collapse, not as malfunctions, but as predictable outcomes. Your mind, like a machine, reaches limits. Too many questions, too many selves, too many versions of the truth. And so it begins to bleed into confusion, numbness, fragmentation. You don't go mad, you go quiet, not from peace, but from overload, from the weight of having to know yourself in a world that keeps shifting what self even means. It's not trauma that breaks you. It's reflection on trauma. It's not suffering that undoes you. It's the desperate attempt to understand suffering. The mind is the only organ that can rot from overuse, that decays from thinking too deeply, too often, with no escape from its own recursive loops. You try to fix yourself, but the act of fixing becomes another entropy-generating process. You learn, you adapt, you evolve, and you fray. Mental entropy theory doesn't tell you to stop thinking. It simply asks, what if this is the cost of consciousness, not a glitch, not a disorder, but the logical endpoint of a brain that can never shut off, a self devoured by its own endless need to define, to explain, to be. You don't explode, you dissolve, one unfinished thought at a time. Transcendental suicide. Transcendental suicide is the chilling, abstract notion that the ultimate act of spiritual awakening is the conscious annihilation of the self, not in search of relief, not in despair, but as an offering to the void. It is the belief that true transcendence lies not in becoming more, but in becoming nothing. That liberation cannot be found through meditation, enlightenment, or inner peace, but only through the final, irreversible release of existence itself. It is not death as escape. It is death as communion with the infinite absence. This philosophy does not romanticize pain. It does not glorify suffering. It emerges from a place of overwhelming clarity, the recognition that all striving, all identity, all meaning-making is noise, that the ego, the soul, the self, all of it is scaffolding built on nothing. And once that scaffolding is seen for what it is, the only honest step forward is demolition, not out of anger, not out of grief, but out of sacred surrender. Transcendental suicide is not impulsive. It is not loud. It is a whisper, a drifting towards silence with reverence. It is the soul removing its mask, laying down its burdens and saying, "I have seen enough." It rejects the idea that there is something to be gained by continuing, not because life is painful, though it often is, but because every moment, even the beautiful ones, is a tether, and the one who transcends wants to be untethered. This is not Camus' absurd hero, who defies the void with passion. It is not the Buddhist who seeks liberation through detachment while still breathing. This is the final, intimate act of one who no longer believes in salvation through experience, the one who has read every book, prayed every prayer, loved and lost, and found that all of it bends back toward the same hollow place, and instead of fearing that place, they walk into it. The terror of transcendental suicide is not just that it ends life, it ends the possibility of meaning. It declares that there is nothing more to say, nothing left to seek, and that the most sacred act a being can perform is to extinguish the flame before it burns out on its own, not as failure, not as surrender, but as completion, a return to the nameless before the beginning. Obscurity as ontology. Obscurity as ontology is the chilling belief that unclarity, not truth, not form, not being, is the fundamental nature of reality, that what lies at the root of all things is not structure, but haze, not a divine order or hidden code, but a thick fog that resists definition, coherence, and meaning. This is not just the idea that we do not understand the universe. It is the idea that the universe is not understandable, that its very fabric is woven from ambiguity, contradiction, and unknowability. It's a philosophy born from the failure of all others. Metaphysics cracks, theology collapses, science reaches further and finds only deeper mystery. Every time you approach the edges of knowledge, you don't find enlightenment, you find fog. Your models stop working, your language breaks down, and you realize that the universe does not behave like something waiting to be understood. It behaves like something actively hiding its essence. Obscurity is not the limit of our understanding. It is the substance of what is. This thought breeds a quiet, slow-burning dread, because if reality itself is obscurity, then every truth we've ever known may be a mirage, every identity may be hollow, every certainty may be scaffolding built over a void. You try to define yourself, but the more you look, the more the self dissolves into inconsistent memories, borrowed language, fluctuating moods. You try to define morality, reality, time, love, and they all shift like shadows on water. Nothing holds. Obscurity as ontology tells you there is no foundation, no absolute, no hidden key, only the illusion that clarity was ever possible in the first place. And when you feel this, not just know it intellectually, but feel it, you begin to question everything, not with anger, not with despair, but with a kind of haunted silence. You start to see the blur behind every form, the echo behind every word. You speak, and your own voice sounds like static. And perhaps the most terrifying part is this: if obscurity is the true nature of being, then even this philosophy cannot be trusted. Even this description of the fog may be fog itself. We are lost, not in darkness, but in distortion, not because we've strayed from the path, but because there never was one, only the illusion of edges in a world made entirely of smoke. The terror of infinity. The terror of infinity is not just fear of the vast, it is the soul-crushing panic that arises when you glimpse the possibility that there is no end, no final page, no last breath, no resolution, that everything, time, space, thought, consciousness, might stretch on forever, looping or unfolding into endless, unknowable complexity. It is not death you fear. It is the impossibility of death ever meaning anything in a reality that never stops. We are taught to fear mortality, but infinity is the deeper horror, because if death is the closing of a door, infinity is the absence of doors. You imagine your soul drifting through endless dimensions, never arriving, never resting. You imagine a consciousness that cannot fade, trapped in an eternal recurrence, reliving moments or existing in a void of timeless awareness forever, not for 1,000,000 years, not for 1,000,000,000, but for a span of duration that defies comprehension, where even the idea of long becomes meaningless. Some experience this terror through mathematics, the ungraspable endlessness of numbers, of pi, of fractals. Others feel it in existential dread, staring into the cosmos and realizing it never ends, or worse, that you might never end, that even after death, something of you continues, thinking, feeling, remembering, carried by some cruel metaphysical inertia, unable to return to non-existence. The terror of infinity is the opposite of peace. It is not being alive forever. It is being aware forever, aware of nothing, aware of everything, without pause, without exit. Every dream becomes a trap. Every escape becomes another corridor of unending thought. Every joy eventually decays into unbearable sameness, and every second stretches until time itself no longer holds meaning. Religions try to tame infinity, heaven as eternal joy, nirvana as eternal stillness, but the raw, unfiltered concept, the infinity that has no design, no purpose, no mercy, does not comfort. It looms, it suffocates, and in its presence, the self begins to unravel, because how can a finite mind, built in the shadow of death, survive the weight of something that never stops? That is the terror of infinity. Not that everything ends, but that maybe nothing does. Repetition of doom. Repetition of doom is the suffocating realization that destruction is not a singular event, but a pattern, an eternal, looping rhythm that underlies existence itself. It is the philosophy that history, trauma, suffering, and collapse do not simply happen. They return over and over, not because we forget, but because the structure of reality demands it. Progress becomes theater, healing becomes illusion, and beneath every hope is the slow, grinding echo of everything happening again. It begins with patterns. You see it in the world, wars declared in the name of peace, cycles of abuse masquerading as love, oppression reinvented with fresh slogans and better branding. Civilizations rise and rot. Empires collapse beneath their own weight and are reborn wearing different flags. The characters change, the costumes shift, but the script remains the same. Over time, you stop asking why. You start asking how long until it begins again. But the horror doesn't stop at history. It comes for you. You notice your own life spinning in circles, the same arguments, the same mistakes, the same ache disguised as something new. You change jobs, lovers, cities, beliefs, but something follows, a shadow with your name on it. You try to evolve, but evolution feels like painting different colors on the walls of the same collapsing room. Your growth is a loop. Your healing is a rerun. You remember pain like it's waiting to be reborn. Repetition of doom is not fate. Fate implies intention. This is worse. It's structure. The way gravity pulls, the way entropy wins, the way systems once diseased do not heal but adapt their sickness. Even when you fight it, even when you resist, scream, burn the map, and walk the other direction, you realize the path was circular all along. The end is the beginning. The fall is the shape of time. It is not prophecy. It is architecture. The blueprint of decay etched into the bones of being. The repetition doesn't come because we are weak. It comes because doom is how things move. The universe doesn't spiral upward. It spirals inward. And at the center of that spiral, you find your own face, weeping the same tears for the third, the fifth, the 1,000th time. Only now you're awake enough to know you've cried them before. Freedom as condemnation. Freedom as condemnation is the cruel paradox at the heart of human existence, that our ability to choose, to define ourselves, to shape our lives, is not a blessing, but a sentence. It is the weight of knowing that no one is coming to save you, that there is no grand plan, no fixed destiny, no divine instruction manual. You are free, and therefore you are responsible for everything, forever. And that knowledge is not empowering, it is crushing. This philosophy begins where existentialism takes its first breath. Sartre called it a burden. Man is condemned to be free. But freedom as condemnation pushes deeper into that wound. It sees freedom not as potential, but as exposure. You stand naked before the infinite, expected to carve meaning out of emptiness, expected to choose your path while knowing full well that every path ends in death, that every choice excludes another, and that every moment of indecision is itself a decision with consequences. To be free is not to live without chains. It is to own the forge, to wake up every day and invent yourself from nothing. And if you fail, if you become cruel or lost or hollow, there is no one else to blame, not your parents, not society, not even God. You cannot point to fate and say, "This is why I became what I am." You must say, "I chose this," or worse, "I didn't choose," and that too was a choice. Freedom as condemnation is felt most sharply in moments of despair, when every option feels meaningless and yet you must still choose, when the world asks you to act as if it matters, when nothing within you believes that it does. You are given the terrifying gift of autonomy and no instruction on how to wield it. You can become anything, and that includes becoming nothing. That includes becoming your own undoing. And even if you choose well, even if you love, build, create, hope, you do so against a backdrop of silence. The universe does not applaud, the stars do not bend toward you, and still you must act. Still, you must bear the weight of your own freedom, knowing that it will never be lifted, only carried, until the end, which you must also choose to face, alone. Human nature as flaw. Human nature as flaw is the philosophy that what defines us most deeply, our instincts, our desires, our consciousness, is not a triumph of evolution, but its most damning error. It is the belief that to be human is to be fundamentally broken, not by accident, not through corruption, but by design. That the very traits we revere, our capacity to love, to dream, to think, to hope, are laced with the seeds of destruction, self-deception, and endless suffering. This isn't misanthropy. It's not hatred of individuals. It's the mourning recognition that being human is a contradiction we can't escape. We long for connection, yet hurt the ones we love. We seek truth, but can't stop lying to ourselves. We strive for meaning, yet destroy what gives us peace. We fear death, yet act like immortals. We know what's right and still choose wrong over and over, as if there's something inside us hardwired to unravel everything we build. You see it everywhere. In history, an endless loop of war, oppression, betrayal, dressed up as civilization. In relationships, fragile bonds held together by fear, habit, or projection more than actual understanding. In the mirror, your own face, full of contradictions, full of knowledge you rarely act on. You know better, and yet, we all do. Human nature, as Flaw says, this isn't a glitch. This is the blueprint. We are animals cursed with reflection. We crave more than we can ever hold. We destroy to feel power, consume to feel whole, numb ourselves to feel peace. We invented gods to explain the ache, and then killed in their names to validate it. The mind is not a sanctuary. It's a battlefield where reason is constantly outnumbered by instinct and insecurity. This philosophy doesn't promise salvation. It doesn't tell you to transcend. It tells you to witness, to see your own cruelty alongside your kindness, to see the beauty you're capable of and how easily you turn away from it. It says the tragedy of being human isn't that we're evil. It's that we know how to be good and still, somehow, aren't. There is no original sin. There is only original structure, and it wasn't designed for peace. It was designed to survive. Everything else, love, morality, meaning, is the desperate poetry we write around the flaw to make it feel like something else. Death drive philosophy, Thanatos. Death drive philosophy, rooted in Freud's concept of Thanatos, is the harrowing belief that within every human being pulses a hidden urge not to survive, but to return to stillness, to unbe, to cease. It is the counterforce to life's instinctual hunger for preservation, an inner gravity that pulls us, slowly or violently, towards self-destruction, silence, and the cold peace of non-existence. Beneath our achievements, our ambitions, even our joys, this philosophy suggests there is a quieter, darker truth. Part of us wants to die. Freud introduced Thanatos as a counterbalance to Eros, the life instinct. But death drive philosophy expands the idea beyond the clinical. It makes it metaphysical. It dares to suggest that human civilization itself, with all its beauty and brutality, may be the performance of a species slowly trying to erase itself. War, addiction, obsession, burnout, suicide, not as anomalies, but as expressions of a deep, inescapable longing to return to the inorganic, to dust, to before. This is not simply depression. It's not despair. It is a cosmic weariness, a suspicion that the desire to go on is not as natural as we pretend it is, that the self-sabotage we see in individuals, in nations, in history, may be driven not by chance, but by something primal and relentless, a need to undo the burden of consciousness, to curl back into the quiet from which we came. You see it in the way people ruin the very things they love, in how we turn connection into codependence, success into burnout, intimacy into fear. We drive forward as if progress matters, all while dreaming of vanishing. The death drive is subtle. It wears masks. It hides in our worst decisions. It speaks in our deepest silence. It doesn't scream. It invites, gently, lovingly. You don't have to keep going, it says. You can let go. And the terror of this philosophy is not that it exists. It's that it makes sense. That part of you recognizes it, that in the quietest moments, when no one's watching, when the world stops demanding performance, you feel it, a longing not for death as pain, but death as relief, as return, as the final truth beneath all your striving, and perhaps your truest desire. Absurd heroism. Absurd heroism is the defiant stance of a soul who knows the universe is meaningless, hostile, or empty, and chooses to act anyway. It is the philosophy that confronts the absurdity of existence, the silence of the cosmos, the inevitability of death, and still says, I will fight, not because it will change anything, not because there is hope, but because the refusal to surrender becomes its own form of dignity, its own quiet and radiant truth. This is not optimism. It is not faith in some hidden order. Absurd heroism begins with full clarity. There is no grand narrative, no divine plan, no karmic justice. You are a conscious animal spinning on a dying rock in a vast, uncaring void. You were thrown here without consent, without instruction. Your thoughts are fleeting. Your relationships will end. Your legacy will fade. There is no rescue coming, and still you rise. Absurd heroism doesn't seek to escape the absurd. It embraces it and keeps going. You love knowing it will hurt. You build knowing it will fall. You create knowing it will be forgotten. You become a flame that burns in full knowledge of the wind. You don't seek meaning from the universe. You forge your own meaning in spite of it. And it is this rebellion, this conscious and continuous refusal to yield, that defines the absurd hero. It is Sisyphus, pushing the boulder not with hope of reward, but with a grin of defiance. It is the artist painting beauty into a world that forgets, the parent nurturing a child in a world built to break them, the activist fighting systems too vast to topple, the lover who risks heartbreak again and again, knowing full well the cost. Absurd heroism is not delusion. It is clear-eyed confrontation. It knows it cannot win and chooses to fight anyway. That choice, that will, becomes the only real power left in a world stripped of guarantees. The absurd hero may not be saved, may not be remembered, but in standing tall against the void, they carve something into it, a scream, a song, a stance, proof that even if nothing matters, I still do. Fatalist determinism. Fatalist determinism is the bleak, immobilizing belief that everything, every breath, every choice, every failure, every flicker of thought was always going to happen exactly as it did. It is the collision of two brutal ideas, that the universe is governed by inescapable causality and that no amount of will, effort, or awareness can change even a single second of it. You are not steering the ship. You are strapped to the deck, watching the waves crash, convinced you're the one sailing. This philosophy doesn't just say free will is limited. It declares it non-existent. It tells you that every word you speak, every desire you feel, every regret you carry was written into the script before you were born. Your memories, your fears, your triumphs, they are not expressions of autonomy. They are gears turning in a cosmic machine that doesn't even know you're there. You are not the author of your story. You are the ink. Fatalist determinism leaves no room for moral credit or blame. You did not choose your kindness. You did not choose your cruelty. The decisions that haunt you were never yours. The moments you treasure, they were illusions of agency, no more authored by you than the trajectory of a falling rock. And yet, you feel every consequence, because consciousness is part of the machinery, too. What makes this belief so psychologically devastating is that it removes the last refuge of control. Even existential despair, at least, gives you the dignity of choosing how to respond. But fatalist determinism mocks that. It whispers, you were always going to despair, you were always going to search, and you were always going to fail. Some try to escape through love, through work, through faith. But this philosophy haunts those too. You love who you were wired to love. You work because you were conditioned to. You pray because fear demanded it. It is not cynicism, it is certainty that this moment, right now, could not have been otherwise, that every fork in the road was a painted illusion, and your path was always a line you mistook for freedom. And when you finally accept that, truly feel it, the world doesn't fall apart. It just stops resisting, and so do you. Pan-suffering hypothesis. The pan-suffering hypothesis is the bleak philosophical notion that suffering is not incidental to life. It is its foundation. It proposes that pain is not a byproduct of flawed systems or unlucky circumstances, but the very fabric of consciousness, the universal constant beneath all experience. All things that live, feel. All things that feel, suffer. And the more deeply we become aware, the more inescapably we are entangled in a web of torment that stretches across species, minds, and time. This hypothesis begins with observation. Every organism, no matter how simple or complex, avoids harm, reacts to pain, trembles in fear. Evolution favors survival, and survival is shaped through suffering. We are taught by pain. We are steered by it. It is the mechanism of adaptation, the signal of threat, the architect of behavior. Joy may be fleeting, but pain is persistent, efficient, instructive. It is the price of sentience, and perhaps its purpose. But the pan-suffering hypothesis doesn't stop at biology. It seeps into consciousness itself. The more aware you are, the more you see. The more you see, the more you hurt. You begin to notice that even love, the highest of human ideals, is lined with ache. We love knowing we can lose. We bond knowing we will grieve. Even beauty, when fully felt, brings sadness because it is transient. All that is precious carries within it the shadow of its end. It is not just that we suffer. It is that we suffer because we are, because we perceive, because we long, because we hope. The moment we feel, we fracture. The moment we understand, we ache. There is no peace untouched by dread, no touch without the risk of absence, no birth without the looming certainty of death. And when you realize this, not just intellectually, but viscerally, it alters everything. You begin to feel the suffering in laughter, in routine, in silence. You see it behind every smile, beneath every success. You see that no creature escapes, that consciousness is a trap with no exit, only brief illusions of escape. The pan-suffering hypothesis doesn't argue for despair. It doesn't ask you to give up. It simply removes the mask. It tells you, this is what life is, and if anything beautiful grows here, it does so through the cracks of agony, against the grain of the very universe that birthed it. Universal nihilism. Universal nihilism is the total collapse of meaning, not just in human life, but in everything. It is the bleak, uncompromising belief that nothing, no soul, no star, no law of physics, no moral impulse, no act of creation possesses inherent value or purpose, not in this world, not in any possible world. It is nihilism stretched to cosmic proportions, where even the universe itself is stripped bare of significance, design, or intent. Not only is there no meaning to your life, there is no meaning to existence at all. This is not the existentialist crisis of purpose, nor the moral nihilist's rejection of good and evil. It is deeper, colder, and far more devastating. Universal nihilism begins where other forms of despair end. It doesn't just ask whether life has meaning. It asks if meaning itself is anything more than a nervous tick of conscious organisms, desperately trying to tame a chaos they were never meant to survive. The answer, it says, is no. It is the vision of a universe that creates stars and supernovas with the same indifference that it creates tumors and extinction. A universe where gravity doesn't care what falls, where time forgets all things, where light travels endlessly through voids that will never be seen, where the sum total of all joy, all pain, all triumph, all genocide, all love songs, all screams, adds up to nothing, not metaphorically, literally. Universal nihilism is not sad, it is not angry, it is the silence after emotion dies, the numb, endless awareness that even your despair is insignificant, that even your yearning for meaning is just one more echo in a vacuum that does not echo back. You were not born for a reason. You will not die for one, and nothing will remember that you were ever here. You may try to resist it with beauty, with love, with defiance, but universal nihilism watches you with a hollow gaze. It knows your resistance was predetermined, like every other chemical reaction, like every dead star. It does not laugh, it does not condemn, it simply waits until you realize that the light at the end of the tunnel is just more tunnel, forever. Antinatalism, mainstream branch. Antinatalism, in its mainstream form, is the philosophical position that bringing new life into existence is morally wrong, not because life is always unbearable, but because it always entails harm. It holds that birth is not a gift, but an imposition, a gamble taken on someone else's behalf without their consent, in a world where suffering is not just likely, but guaranteed. At its core, antinatalism is not hatred of life. It is compassion taken to its most unsettling conclusion. This philosophy begins with a brutal honesty. To be born is to be exposed to pain, physical pain, psychological torment, grief, fear, humiliation, death. No one escapes. Even in the best lives, there are moments so crushing, so soul-eroding, that they leave scars. And in the worst lives, there is hunger, war, abuse, disease, despair so deep it erases the will to continue. Antinatalism argues, if we would not wish this on ourselves from a state of non-existence, how can we justify imposing it on another? The mainstream branch is most often associated with thinkers like David Benatar, who argues that there is an asymmetry between pain and pleasure. The presence of pain is bad, but the absence of pain in someone who doesn't exist is not bad. Meanwhile, the absence of pleasure is not bad either, because there is no one to be deprived. So, non-existence, from this view, is preferable to existence, because it prevents harm without withholding benefit. Antinatalism doesn't deny that life can contain beauty, love, joy, or meaning. It simply argues that these cannot outweigh the suffering that inevitably comes with them, especially when that suffering is thrust upon someone who never asked to play the game. It asks, why take the risk? Why roll the dice on a world of chaos, climate collapse, cruelty, and entropy, just to satisfy our need to reproduce, to nurture, to see a reflection of ourselves? To the anti-natalist, creating life is not a miracle. It is a moral failure, a decision driven by instinct, ego, or tradition, disguised as love. And in its place, this philosophy offers a cold, clear mercy. Don't create suffering where none need exist. Let the line end with kindness. Let the silence speak peace. Let what never lives never weep. The will to nothingness. The will to nothingness is the deepest and most terrifying current beneath human desire. The drive not for survival, not for love, not even for power, but for obliteration. It is the compulsion, buried under every ambition and every scream, to return to the silence that existed before you. Nietzsche saw it as the ultimate betrayal of life, the moment the human spirit would rather will nothing than accept a world without absolute truth, without control, without permanence. But this philosophy goes further. It asks, what if the will to nothingness is not a corruption of life, but its essence? This is not self-destruction born of despair. It is not a cry for help. It is something colder, deeper, more intimate, a gravitational pull toward erasure, felt not only in moments of pain, but in moments of clarity. When you peel back all the wants, the needs, the mass, you find not a higher purpose, but an ache to stop being, a desire not to suffer, but to disappear, to unmake yourself, not because life is too hard, but because it is too much. The will to nothingness is the whisper behind burnout, behind apathy, behind the strange comfort we feel when something collapses. It is what smiles in the background when people sabotage their dreams, end their marriages, throw away their art. It is the secret satisfaction in failure, the relief that you no longer have to try, no longer have to be. It is not hatred of the self. It is exhaustion with the self, and with the world that demands its endless performance. This philosophy tells you that even creation contains destruction, that every structure longs to crumble, that every act of becoming carries a seed of annihilation. We do not simply fear the void, we crave it. We are drawn to it. The stillness, the end of hunger, the end of becoming, the final perfect negation where there is no more self to betray, no more future to disappoint, no more mirror to confront. And what makes the will to nothingness so devastating is its seduction. It doesn't scream, it calms. It says enough. It says lay it down, not because you failed, but because you've seen through the illusion. And now there is only the ache to go back to the place before the first thought, before the first breath, before the world began to ask for anything at all. Detachment from existence. Detachment from existence is the slow, quiet withdrawal of the soul from the drama of being. It is not apathy, and it is not despair. It is the philosophical and emotional movement away from engagement with life, not because it is unbearable, but because it is unworthy of clinging to. It is the moment when one sees the world clearly, its endless cycles, its illusions of meaning, its ceaseless hunger, and chooses to step back, not in defeat, but in liberation. This philosophy emerges not from trauma, but from clarity, from the realization that so much of what we chase, success, validation, pleasure, permanence, is built on illusions that slip through our fingers the moment we grasp them. You achieve and you are empty. You love and you fear. You speak and it echoes back with misunderstanding. Over time, you begin to loosen your grip, not because you don't care, but because you finally see that nothing here lasts, nothing here satisfies, and nothing here truly belongs to you. Detachment from existence is not suicidal. It does not seek death. It seeks freedom. It is the desire to exist without being entangled, to breathe without needing, to watch the world spin without being spun by it. It is the relinquishing of identity, of ownership, of outcome. You stop insisting that life makes sense. You stop begging it to feel right. You let it pass through you like wind through leaves, felt but not clung to. You may still laugh, still cry, still care, but a part of you watches gently from beyond the self, as if your soul is standing just behind your body, hands loosely folded, saying, "Ah, yes, this again. There is peace in that, a stillness that cannot be shaken by disappointment or loss, because you no longer expect the world to fill what it cannot reach." Detachment from existence is not numbness. It is the soft, sacred act of loosening the chains of desire, of saying, "I do not need to be this. I do not need to win this. I do not need to hold this together." It is the final letting go, not of life itself, but of the need for life to justify itself. And in that letting go, for the first time, you are truly free. Camusian revolt. Camusian revolt is the fierce, defiant scream hurled into the silent void, the refusal to surrender in a world without inherent meaning, without gods, without answers. It is the human spirit standing upright in the face of the absurd, saying yes to life even when life offers no justification for itself. Albert Camus called it the revolt of the heart, a stance not of hope, but of refusal. Refusal to be broken, refusal to be silent, refusal to lie down before the absurdity of existence and simply accept it. This revolt does not come from optimism. It comes from clarity, the clarity that life is ultimately meaningless, that death is inevitable, that every attempt to find absolute truth collapses under its own weight, that God is silent, that the universe will never explain itself. And yet, despite that, because of that, you choose to live, to rebel, not by escaping the absurd, but by confronting it, by looking it in the face and saying, "I will create my own terms." Camusian revolt is not dramatic. It is quiet, persistent, and unwavering. It is continuing the day's work after a funeral. It is washing the dishes with trembling hands. It is showing kindness in a world that has not earned it. It is choosing to speak truth in a society that thrives on delusion. It is love, laughter, art, resistance, not because they last, not because they matter in the grand scheme, but precisely because they are fleeting, because you matter, even if nothing else does. The revolt doesn't save you. It doesn't solve anything. It simply asserts, "I will not consent to despair." It does not ask for comfort or validation. It does not wait for miracles. It stands alone, stripped of illusions, trembling, and still says yes, not to life as it should be, but to life as it is, with its pain, with its absurdity, with its unbearable freedom. Camus called Sisyphus the absurd hero, eternally pushing his stone up the hill, knowing it will fall again, and yet still pushing. But Camusian revolt is more than endurance. It is love, love for the struggle itself, love that needs no reward, love that burns in the face of nothing and refuses to go out. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence is not just a thought experiment. It is a philosophical gauntlet thrown at the feet of your soul. It asks one terrifying question: what if you had to live this exact life, every pain, every ecstasy, every mistake, every regret, over and over again, forever? not once, not twice, but an infinite loop with no change, no escape, and no forgetting. Every breath you take, every heartbreak you endure, every cruel word you've spoken, all of it repeated exactly, eternally. It's not punishment. It's not reward. It is mirror and test. It doesn't care what you believe. It forces you to confront how you live. Imagine the moment you're told this by a demon, Nietzsche says. At first, your blood might run cold because you remember the nights you begged not to wake up, the losses that hollowed you out, the hours wasted in mediocrity, addiction, fear. You think, no, anything but that, not again. But then you realize this isn't a curse from outside. It's a reflection of the value you assign to your own life. And if you recoil in horror, what does that say about how you are living? The eternal recurrence is not a metaphysical claim. It is a challenge. It's Nietzsche holding a blade to your throat, saying, can you love your fate so completely that you would live it again forever? Amor fati. Love your fate, not tolerate it, not endure it. Love it. Every wound, every silence, every absurdity. If you can't, change your life, because in this test, there is no God to forgive you, no afterlife to balance the scales, only the echo chamber of your choices, amplified by eternity. And if you can say yes, if you can embrace every flaw in your story and still affirm it, then you have transcended the moral scaffolding of reward and punishment. You've become something more than man. You've created value from within, unshaken by divine command or cosmic justice. You've stared eternity in the face and smiled, because to say yes to eternal recurrence is to say yes to being alive, not as you wish it were, but as it is, forever. Kierkegaardian despair. Kierkegaardian despair is not sadness. It is not grief. It is the quiet, consuming sickness that arises from being yourself and knowing you are not whole. It is the spiritual and existential agony that comes when you realize that you are fractured at the core, divided between what you are and what you were meant to be. For Soren Kierkegaard, despair is not something that happens to the unlucky few. It is the default condition of human existence. To live is to be in despair. The only question is whether you know it yet. This despair is not caused by circumstance. It is not about losing a loved one or failing at a dream. It is deeper than all of that. It is the collapse between your finite self, the roles, the routines, the personality you perform, and your infinite self, the part of you that yearns for transcendence, for authenticity, for something eternal. Kierkegaard saw this dissonance as a spiritual wound, and the more you avoid it, the worse it festers. There is the despair of not knowing you are in despair, a hollow, numb life filled with distraction, success, religion, or routine, all layered to keep you from noticing the emptiness beneath. And then there is the deeper, sharper despair of knowing, of becoming aware that you are not your true self, that your life is out of alignment with your essence, and feeling powerless to fix it. That is the existential hell Kierkegaard lays bare, not death, but the refusal to become who you really are. This kind of despair often awakens in quiet moments, a glance in the mirror that feels like looking at a stranger, a conversation where the words sound right, but something vital is missing, a success that leaves you emptier than failure ever did. You begin to sense that the life you're living, its choices, its comforts, its performances, is not you, and that you might not even exist yet. Or worse, that you're afraid to find out who you really are, because that would demand everything. Kierkegaardian despair isn't about wanting to die. It's about realizing that you are not yet alive, and until you reconcile your finite self with the infinite call within you, until you stop hiding from yourself, until you dare to become what your soul aches to be, you will suffer, quietly, relentlessly, even if everything else appears perfect. Heideggerian angst. Heideggerian angst is not fear of something. It is fear of nothing. Not a void in the future, not a specific threat, but a trembling confrontation with the groundlessness of being itself. It is the moment you look around and realize that everything, your job, your name, your relationships, even your own sense of self, is suspended over an abyss with no foundation, not because something went wrong, but because this is what existence is. Martin Heidegger called it angst, and it's not the same as anxiety in the psychological sense. It's deeper, more existential. It arises when the structures you rely on to give life meaning, culture, religion, identity, suddenly feel alien, hollow, or absurd. You're walking through a normal day, then something shatters. Maybe it's in silence. Maybe it's in the look someone gives you. Maybe it's in a mirror, and you realize you are just here, thrown into the world without your consent, spinning in a space that doesn't explain itself. You can't point to what you're afraid of. There's no object, no resolution. It's not dread of death. It's the realization that even life, fully lived, offers no inherent reason. It's the sharp awareness that all the roles you play, student, spouse, artist, citizen, are just masks, and behind them, nothing, or rather, the unformed, uncaring, unstructured chaos of being itself. Heideggerian angst doesn't destroy you. It strips you. It removes the protective myths, the comforting labels, the automatic motions. It leaves you naked in the face of reality's indifference. And in that rawness, something terrifyingly honest happens. You see that you are free, not empowered, not uplifted, free, to choose, to act, to become, with no script to follow, and no one to tell you how it ends. That freedom is paralyzing, because it means you must take responsibility, not just for what you do, but for the meaning you assign to the world itself. You are the author of your own significance in a universe that offers none, and yet, in the pit of that angst, a possibility glimmers, that this nothingness is not death, but space, that the emptiness is openness, that in the collapse of given meaning, you might carve your own. But first, you must feel it, that cold, heavy silence in your chest, that recognition that there is no reason you are here, and still, here you are,